Hey everybody, happy Thursday and welcome to the Thursday, December 3rd edition of TechStrong TV. I am Charlene O'Hanlon sitting in for Alan Schimmel, and I just am so thrilled to be here today. We have a great lineup of interviews for you to enjoy for the next 2.5 or 3 hours or so, starting with an interview that I did with Vladi Sandler, who is with a company called Lightspin. They recently came out of stealth with $4 million in funding, seed funding, which was announced in late November. And he and I have a great discussion about their company, the technology, what they plan to do with the money, and lots of other great stuff. So please stick around and check out that one. After my interview with Vladi, excuse me, I come back on and I have a great discussion with RJ Janendra, who is the VP of Business, IT Business Management and DevOps Business Unit at ServiceNow. ServiceNow just recently completed its first year in the DevOps space with a DevOps offering. And so RJ and I have a discussion about a couple things that the company has done in those last 12 months, including acquiring a company called Sweegle and also being named a leader in the Forrester Wave Value Stream Management Solutions category. That was really only after 8 months of the solution actually being in the market. So really, really good stuff there. So hopefully you guys will get a great, listen to a great interview that we have between RJ and me. After that, we've got Alan, who had a discussion with Harpreet Singh, who is a co-founder and CEO of Launchable Inc. He was also previously with Atlassian and CloudBees. They discuss the kind of where Launchable is today, about 8 months or so, or maybe a year since it's launching. Launchable, for those of you who don't know, is a test automation platform that helps organizations run the right test at the right time. So it's a great technology, and Harpreet and Alan discuss basically what's been going on with the company since it launched. Then we have a previously enjoyed Devops Unbound episode. It's a really, really great one. We wanted to go ahead and rerun it again because it was such a great conversation that Alan had with Mitch Ashley, of course, Mark Settle, who's an author, Louise Mccarthy, who is a CIO advisor, and Eveline Ehrlich of the DevOps Institute. And they have a very spirited discussion on accessibility and usability design in DevOps. Great conversation, totally worth the time watching it. So I really highly recommend that you do so. After that, I come back on. I have a really, really fascinating conversation with a gentleman by the name of Philippe Himot, who is CEO and founder of a company called Crowdsec. They are a crowd-based security platform. They're open source, they're free, and they're available excuse me, to anybody who wants to take part in it. What it does is analyzes user behavior and provide an adapted response to all kinds of attacks. So again, it is crowdsourced, so it relies on its users to make its platform more efficient and more valuable. So Philippe and I have a great conversation about the technology, about the future of crowdsourcing solutions, and what its plans are for the coming year. After that, I do the webinar preview, as always, showing you guys 3 webinars that we have coming up that are totally worth your time. And after that, we have Mitch Ashley coming on with his regular installment of the Analyst Corner. And then he has a conversation with author, speaker, and former CIO Greg Sanker. They talk about the impact of Agile, DevOps, and Cicd on traditional change control teams. This is a really, really interesting conversation because they really kind of get deep into Agile and DevOps, and how really that has impacted a lot of organizations in the way they do change control. Greg, shares his views on change control and what the new role is for change control teams. And he also talks about his contributions to the ITIL 4 Change Enablement Guide. So good stuff, definitely worth checking out. Then we have a double dose of Mike Fazard's interviews. First up, he has a conversation with Cindy Blake, who is the senior security evangelist at GitLab. They talk about how DevSecOps will be evolving. The company, if you remember, acquired Peach, Fuzz, and Fuzzit about 6 months ago, maybe a little bit later. But that basically, those acquisitions kind of changed the direction for GitLab in the security sense. So they have a conversation about really how those companies are impacting DevOps. GitLab's business model as it pertains to DevSecOps and really what they're looking for in the months ahead. Then Mike talks to Logs.io CEO Tomer Levy. They have a great discussion about what's driving the need for observability in the wake of the company gaining $23 million in additional financing. That is definitely, that's an amount that is nothing to sneeze at. And I know that Logs.io has great plans for the observability space. Observability is a hot topic with a lot of organizations these days, and there's been a lot of activity in the observability space with mergers and acquisitions. So I'm sure that what Tomer and Mike talk about is definitely relevant to the observability space in general, so definitely one worth checking out. As I said, we've got a great show for you today. I hope that that you're able to stick around and watch most, if not all of it. So we will be back to get things kicked off right after this. Hey, welcome back, everybody. First up on TechStrong TV is an interview I did with Vladi Sandler of Lightspin. We talk about the seed funding that the company just recently got, $4 million to be exact, and what their plans are for the money and the company direction moving forward. So let's give this one a look.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everybody, welcome back to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am here now with Vladi Sandler, who is the CEO and co-founder of a company called Lightspin, the cloud security company, right?
Correct. Hi, good evening. Right. Good morning in your case.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining me today. Really do appreciate it. You guys just came out of stealth, and you got some money, some funding, $4 million in seed funding, I think?
Correct.
Okay. All right, great. So tell me a little bit about Lightspin, what you guys are all about, and we'll take it from there.
Perfect. So Lightspin is a contextual cloud security platform, which we raised from IBEX investors, our $4 million fund, the seed round. Lightspin actually provides you a holistic solution for your cloud stack. We can give you an attacker's approach. So when we say that, we mean that the problem is the solutions today in the market is that they provide you a list of findings, but attackers don't look in lists. Attackers look in graphs. They're trying to do lateral movement. And here's where the contextual approach is coming through. What's Lightspin do? We can actually integrate your stack from infrastructure as a service to platform as a service for the singular service, analyze your environment in a passive way, and show you all the misconfiguration, risky permission, CVs, and more as a chain, as an attack path. So we give you the red glasses that show you how does the attacker see your environment and how it can cause it damage. The reason we do that is because thanks to the contextual approach, you can get the real risk and priority of the problems in your environment. You can really understand what you should do in order to improve the security level of the environment, reduce the risk, including the mitigation plans that we provide you with. So it's pretty much about Lightspin.
That's interesting. So the contextual approach seems to be kind of offering organizations kind of a stepping stone approach, if you will, to cloud security. What is it about cloud security in general that this contextual approach actually kind of creates more of a benefit for organizations over other types of security? Is it visibility? Is it is it the agility, or what is it exactly about that approach that makes it more beneficial?
So of course, first of all, visibility. Using this approach, since we connect between the dots, and that's how our backend build and database build and the algorithms, everything is based on graph-based theory. We can really fast in agentless connectivity without any specific integration, can map your environment. Secondly, in cloud, everything is about permission configuration. So once you get an alert or finding, it doesn't matter nothing. I mean, in the end of the day, from one finding, you cannot understand if this finding is low, medium, or high. That's why we look and think like an attacker, right? So what we show you, what will be the next step? What will be the impact from this problem or this finding, and how it can cause a damage to the environment, financial, reputation, data breach, and more. And it is the big difference in what we do today, because in the end of the day, that's what the customer needs. He don't need 160 alerts. He just want me to paint him the white noise, show them exactly the findings that can cause to the second finding, show another one, something we call configuration vulnerabilities and exploitation of misconfiguration or risky permission, so you can understand exactly where is the real root cause problems you have in the environment.
Interesting. All right. So let's talk a little bit about your organization specifically. How long have you guys been around, and what is the makeup of your organization, and where are you guys based? Love to hear about it.
Cool. So we started the company on January this year, get founded, signed a term sheet on March, and get funded on April. Since then, we've been in stealth mode because we wanted to do a really good product market fit and see that the technology really give value to the customers. Once we succeeded on this milestone, we understood this is the right time to get off from stealth. And from the company's point of view, one of the things that is our main vision and goal and milestone, and actually we're really standing on that, is an equal company. We have 50% men, 50% women, and not only in marketing, but in most of them are in R&D and research, and we're really proud about it because our developers are the best. I'm really proud of each one of them, and it's something excited.
That's great. It's really great to hear, especially when you hear about all of the, the fact that so many organizations are, I'll just say it, male dominated, and there's really not a lot of diversity among the employee ranks at all levels, from the C-level down. Did you guys set out to actually be a company that is kind of equally divided between males and females?
Yes, I mean, in the end of the day, our investors are female, and from our side, everyone who has joined the team, we look at them in an equal way. I mean, today is the core team, right? So it doesn't matter if you're head of something or just a developer, man or woman. It not really matter. Each one of the manpower on women power and Lightspin give crazy value. He gives the impact that can really change how would the product look like and how would the value to the customers looks like. So yes, it was part of our vision. We hope to continue to build exactly this kind of vision, even when we've grown up for more than just 12 employees. And today we're located in Tel Aviv in Israel, but and our vision, after the next founding round, our plan will be to create another HQ in the United States, probably in New York. But we are open-minded. And most of our markets today, as we stated, we're looking on the East Coast and West Central Europe, especially in the financial sector, but not all, not only. But it's pretty much the story.
That's great. That's great. I love hearing about the fact that companies are actually making a concerted effort to have that level of diversity in their organizations. So kudos to you guys for doing that. That's awesome.
Thank you very much.
So what do you guys see then, with your technology and considering the landscape that's out there right now, and just the fact that cloud security is such a complex animal, and a lot of that I would imagine has to do with the fact that cloud services providers kind of each speak their own language, if you will, for a lot of offerings and technologies and alerts that they have. There seems to be kind of no governance, if you will, among cloud services providers when it comes to security. And so, given that level of complexity that's out there now, where do you see kind of the market shaping up in the next year or so, as and maybe even beyond, as companies such as yours kind of take that contextual approach to security?
It's funny, there is a famous meme on the internet that says, who was responsible for the digital transformation in your organization, the CEO, CTO, or COVID-19, right?
Right.
So it's
right.
So it's pretty much the story, meaning the end of the day, we are actually going to have about it a post and a panel that we're planning. We call it the maturity to the cloud. Following our internal research and experience of the market, we see that the concept of maturity of the cloud is really interesting on the relationship of the organizations. What do I mean by that is that a lot of companies starting to migrate to single cloud environment, right? Most of the cases, let's say Amazon, infrastructure as a service. Mm-hmm. Once they got more mature, they're going to be in some middle container-based environment, let's say ECS or just Docker environment. Really fast move to be on Kubernetes as a platform as a service, or Cloud Foundry, it doesn't matter, but concepts need scale and easier way to manage the Dockers and containers. And in the future, they will move to be serverless architectures. So what's interesting about it is that in the same time, a lot of organizations, once they deployed in one infrastructure as a service, let's say Amazon again, they become to be in some point to be, first of all, multi-cloud environment with Azure and Google Cloud. Right. And third, become to be hybrid cloud environments. Now, here we see two interesting approaches. From one side, we see the Fortune 500 companies which continue doing M&A process, during which they acquire companies, but part of them are on-premise yet, so they become to be a hybrid cloud. From other side, we see companies which just create a project on the cloud, like Netflix, let's say, and they 100% cloud. But the biggest challenge is the ability to handle the cloud. In the end of the day, the digital transformation, especially the COVID-19, made this process even faster, and not always the enterprise has the capabilities to handle this scale. And what's interesting about this fact is that the ability of human being learn new technology is much more slower than the growth of the technology. I mean, until I will learn Amazon, I will have to, based on my organization, learn Kubernetes, and then I have to learn Azure and Google Cloud, probably Alibaba Cloud. There is no end for that, right? So it's a huge challenge. It's a huge challenge to the organizations to handle cloud security today. A lot of companies and a lot of CISOs have even bigger challenge, because the first step is to prove that the security in the cloud is equal to the on-premise. That's why there were a lot of compliance solutions on the past. Even today we have a lot. But today you don't really need the solutions. Even cloud provider give you these capabilities. From other side, you see a lot of players on the runtime protection. But all this are the old world of the on-premise one. Because on the cloud, as I said before, everything is about configurations and permissions. Everything you do with infrastructure as a code. So in order to handle this scale, and handle this complexity of cloud management, you need different approach. You need different kind of solutions, just like Lightspin. Because one of the things that we can really help on is not only give you the visibility of your cloud stack, but simplify for you the cloud security management, which is really critical, especially because I think everyone has starvation for experts today, especially in cloud security.
So with that in mind, we're hearing so many more organizations kind of forcing digital transformation. That actually they've had digital transformation kind of being forced on them this year, especially with COVID-19. The fact that organizations are now looking at multi-cloud environments and hybrid cloud environments, and they are kind of working with a number of different cloud services providers to provide kind of that best of breed experience, if you will, for their employees and their end users alike. Do you see that cloud security and the solutions that are available now and maybe coming down the road, do you see that there will be a greater emphasis on addressing those kind of unique characteristics of multi-cloud environments and hybrid cloud environments to kind of ease that, ease the pain, if you will, of security in these environments moving forward for organizations, especially since, as I said, so many of them have kind of been thrust into a digital transformation initiative, and they just were not prepared. And so, the level of complexity that adds, could send some companies just right over the edge. So, do you see a level of simplicity, hopefully coming down the pike for organizations as they get further into their digital transformation efforts?
So the simplicity won't come from the cloud service providers. That's the point. It cannot happen because I don't see how Amazon will help to Azure-based customers, right?
Sure.
And even when you look on the pyramid of the responsibilities of the cloud provider, everything about configurations and permissions under the responsibility of the enterprise. And it's correct approach. That's how it should be, right? I mean, it's like, I don't know, if you develop a code, you use some framework, the framework not responsible for the code that your developers write. Same here. Cloud provider not really responsible for the DevOps team creating the infrastructure of the code. So yes, absolutely, there should be different approach and should be simplification happen in the future. I think this pain will be even increased more, in my opinion, just because, as I said before, the salvation for experts and the maturity to the cloud are the reasons for that. And I think that's exactly where else we came from, because I'm big believer that when you have a pain, you need to solve it. And that's exactly the story of Lightspin. We for years suffered from this pain, so we decided just to solve
it. Well, nobody else is stepping up, right? So it might as well be you guys. So tell me
the best.
So what do you have planned for the future then? What's up for your company coming down the pipe?
Yeah, so 2021 will be really interesting for us. On this year, we have a lot of plans from the technology approach and business approach. First of all, we want to develop more modules that can provide better visibility and better capabilities for graph attack path. And secondly, we will want to hire more people for the team and make the business even more productive and get better value to our customers and bring new customers. And yes, 2021, we have a strategy to raise Round A and start to run even faster.
Excellent. Well, Vladi, thank you so much for talking me through the company, what you guys are seeing on the landscape, what's up for you guys, and best of luck to you and to Lightspin. All right.
Thanks. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. And please come back in a couple months or so and give us an update on what's happening with you guys, okay?
I would love to. Thank you very much.
All right. Perfect. All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Hey, welcome back. We've got up next RJ Janendra, who is with ServiceNow. He and I talk about what's been happening with ServiceNow in the DevOps space since the year or so that the company actually dove right into DevOps. So give this one a look. Thanks.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everybody, welcome back to TechStrong TV. I am Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am here now with RJ Janendra, who is the VP and General Manager of ITBM and DevOps at ServiceNow. RJ, thank you so much for taking a couple of minutes and talking with me today. Really appreciate it.
Hey Charlene, it's really nice to be here.
Great. So let's talk about, you guys have been doing DevOps now for about a year, and recently celebrated your 1-year anniversary with the introduction of your DevOps solution, correct?
That's right, Charlene. We launched our initial DevOps offering about a year ago, and it's really been resonating with our customers as we've taken that into the market.
Oh, that's great. Congratulations on that. I'd love to hear about some of the things that you guys have seen in the year, pertaining to what you guys are doing, but also what's happening in the marketplace. But first, why don't we go over just maybe a couple milestones that you guys have achieved kind of in that 1 year that since the introduction. So tell me a little bit about just kind of an overview. Why did you guys kind of decide to dive into DevOps and into the space, and what were some of the motivating factors there, and what have you guys seen since you did that?
So the reason we got into DevOps is really that if you think about DevOps as a term has been around now for almost a dozen years, right? But as we talk to customers, what we consistently heard from them was that while their development teams had adopted modern practices, CI/CD and test automation and things like that, there was really a last mile problem, which is really that change in release management hadn't really evolved to the point that they could keep up with the speed that their development teams are moving. And so at ServiceNow, we felt that was a problem that we could really help with, because as you know, ServiceNow is a leader in IT service management, and change management is an integral part of that. And we felt that it was time to modernize that whole change management process by leveraging data and automation to be able to address that, unlock that sort of last mile, so that teams could truly build and deliver their applications at speed, but do it safely. And so we launched the product last year, and it has really resonated with customers, right? And we find customers on kind of it's a continuum in terms of their maturity around DevOps. So where we have customers who are very progressive, there what we see is really about the notion of more about change registration, being able to have that audit event that something has changed in the system, knowing what's changed, getting that entire context in case a problem arises, they could roll back quickly. But then at the same time, we see customers who are earlier in their DevOps journey. For them, it's really about getting that change ticket created in an automated way, but then leveraging data, leveraging policies, so that the majority of changes could be approved by the system. It doesn't require a human to look at it. And then people can really focus on the changes that need attention. And at the same time, improving the developer experience, where developers, they love to stay inside the tools that they normally use, whether that's an IDE or a command line, et cetera. And so letting them continue to work in the tools that they love and use, and not requiring them to break the flow, come into ServiceNow to fill out a change form, but really leveraging automation via integrations to their pipeline tools, integrations to their Git repo, et cetera, to again bring the data and leverage the automation. So that whole notion of improving the developer experience, but then also automate the lifecycle has really resonated with our customers.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, well, that makes a lot of sense, especially since so many organizations now are focused on user experiences. So, having that developer experience be a positive one, I can only imagine is a benefit to the organizations there. So, so tell me a little bit about some of the things that you guys have done over the past year to kind of make that happen. I know at one point you guys acquired a company called Swiggle. So tell me a little bit about that acquisition, how that kind of fits into your whole DevOps outlook, perspective, and capabilities there, and what are some of the other things that you guys have done?
Certainly. And so if you think about delivering applications, right? So we provide out-of-the-box integrations with tools like Microsoft Azure DevOps, with GitHub, GitLab, Jenkins, and we help our customers deliver those applications safely. But as customers are moving to the cloud, right, whether it's Microsoft Azure or they're moving to AWS, increasingly the kind of information that drives the behavior of the application is now represented in configurations. Right? These may be configuration files that Terraform uses to spin up the infrastructure, or they may be config files that are used by applications in terms of driving the behavior of the application or how the application is kept secure. And so with Swiggle, what we're doing is providing a single source of truth for configuration data. If you think about application code, and you think about what's the single source of truth for application code, right away we all think about Git, right? The Git repos where all of that's typically checked in. But if you think about configuration data that drives the behavior of infrastructure, of applications, today there isn't a single source of truth for that, right? So it may be stored in a repo, it may be in Terraform templates, it could be in a Chef data bag, or maybe it's in the Ansible, some sort of a script. And so what we're doing with Swiggle is we're ingesting all of these different sources and bringing configuration data into a single place where then it's managed, it's tracked, it's kept secure. And by doing so, then customers can really leverage that information from that single source to drive configurations for the infrastructure and applications. And in fact, they can also leverage that information to understand what configurations may cause problems and be able to prevent those configurations from going into environments prior to deployment, so that they don't cause problems in those environments. Right. So part of that is machine learning. So we're able to ingest configuration data, understand, is it a connection string to a database? Is it a credential? Is it a memory setting? And with that understanding, we're able to then determine what good looks like, right? What settings have caused problems in the past. And so that if we do see something that's problematic, we can stop the deployment in the pipeline itself. So super excited about that. We're replatforming the technology. It'll be available to customers in 2021. And so with that, we feel that we really round up that story around the quality of applications and infrastructure as it flows through the pipeline, both from an application code, but also from a configuration perspective. The other thing that we did this year, of course, is we participated in the Forrester Value Stream Management Wave, where ServiceNow was placed as a leader, and super excited about that outcome, because what we're seeing from customers is that they're really trying to understand that end-to-end flow, right? If you think about very simply plan, build, and run for DevOps, they're trying to understand the entire process and where are the bottlenecks. Because oftentimes, while development teams may have adopted DevOps practices, the front end may still take 6-12 months from a planning perspective, going through annual planning cycles. And so really what we're doing with ServiceNow, and we're super differentiated in the sense that we have a single data model where we can represent all of that value stream in a single data set. We're able to then help customers understand that end-to-end flow and pinpoint where the bottlenecks may be so that they can optimize. So excited about the placement there. And of course, we've been successful in getting a number of customers to value. We have customers like DNB, FIS, WorldPay, and TomTom, to name a few, that are seeing tremendous value from the solutions that they've implemented.
That's great. That's great. And congratulations on the Forrester thing, by the way. That's pretty amazing. what do you think, because of your background or your roots in IT service management, do you see kind of more organizations moving toward a DevOps model, especially in the enterprise? Because we hear, obviously a lot about the startups that, kind of they're DevOps houses and that's all they've ever done. But it seems to me that the enterprise is moving a little, more slowly when it comes to adopting the DevOps mindset, culture, technologies, and tools. Do you see that changing, especially perhaps in light of the digital transformation that's being brought on by COVID-19?
Absolutely. The adoption is continuing to increase. Customers that have gone through the digital transformation are seeing the benefits, right? So as we went through the events this year, they were able to pivot their business models. They were able to come up with new innovations very quickly. And so we do see that as a driver for the adoption of DevOps. And what we're seeing is that while customers are experiencing success in pockets, right? And so if you talk to any large enterprise, they have some teams or groups that are practicing DevOps, but what's really been challenging for them is to get that to scale within the organization, right? And that's what we see the opportunity really is to be able to meet the needs of the enterprise. Because one of the things that we think about is, why hasn't DevOps scaled in the enterprise? And it's really because while teams have their needs being met by a lot of the tooling that's out there, right? If you're a Java developer, you have a whole tool set that you can use, or if you're in Azure DevOps, etc. But really the needs of the enterprise haven't been met, right? Those have been relegated to some of those manual workflows, right? If you're thinking about security, you're thinking about change or compliance or legal and risk. And so that's really the opportunity for us at ServiceNow is to leverage integrations and the data that are being generated in all of these developer tools, bring them into ServiceNow, where it can be a correlated data set, something that we call the service graph, that can then be leveraged to automate those enterprise workflows. And so in that sense, then we give the assurance to the service management and IT operations teams that that the processes are being followed, that they are being compliant, but at the same time, be able to work in that distributed operating model. So increasingly, what we're seeing interest from customers is where they do have that central IT team that doesn't go away, right? They still have that, but the role of that central team is more around enablement, where they can provide frameworks and guardrails to the multitude of DevOps teams that can follow the processes. And again, a lot of these are baked in automation and data, as opposed to manual filling out forms. And so we're starting to see more of this evolution towards that distributed operating model.
That's interesting. So where do you guys see yourselves kind of moving forward then, both technology-wise, offerings-wise, and with your customers?
So as we think about the technology, where we have entered the space serving our customers on that change management, if you think of that, that's on the right side, on the delivery side. But if you think about the benefits, we're going to continue shifting left as well, right? So in this sense, if you think about policies, there's no reason to wait till that change window to understand whether you're using a library that's been approved by a security team, right? Ideally, a developer, as soon as they commit their code, should get a notification if what they've checked in is not compliant, right? So we'll look at taking some of the capabilities we have and shifting it left through the pipeline so that we can give earlier indications to developers and development teams of problems that could occur further downstream, but then give them that opportunity early on to address it. And as we look at moving forward, we're going to continue focusing on sort of three pillars, right? One is how do we continue to help teams and customers innovate quickly and safely, and leveraging these notions of policies and reducing failure rates and improving the time to deploy. The second is around improving the developer experience. We do want to continue keeping developers productive, using the tools that they like to. And so from that perspective, you'll see more innovation from ServiceNow that bring capabilities to developers, whether it's a command line interface so that they can interact with ServiceNow from those places that they used to. And then finally pinpoint and remediate rapidly, right? So when there are impactful services, be able to recover from that very, very quickly. So that way, we minimize the impact to customers.
Well, very, very cool. Well, I wish you guys the best of luck and congratulations on hitting that 1-year milestone. That's pretty cool. And I'm looking forward to hearing about what you guys have going on in the next year.
Thanks, Charlene.
All right, RJ. Thank you so much for joining me today. Really do appreciate it. All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more. ContainerJournal.com is operated by MediaOps Inc., the team behind Devops.com, Digital Anarchist, SecurityBoulevard.com, DevOps Connect, and DevOpsDozen.com.
Hey everybody, welcome back. Next up, we have Alan in an interview with Harpreet Singh, who is one of the co-founders and co-CEOs of Launchable Inc. You may remember that Harpreet co-launched the company with Kosuke Kawaguchi, who is the inventor of Jenkins and formerly with CloudBees. And together they created a Launchable, which has a test automation platform that is definitely worth checking out, as is this interview. So stay tuned, give it a watch.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us here on another segment for our TechStrong TV show. My guest for this segment is Harpreet Singh. Harpreet is one of the co-founders of Launchable Inc., because it's launchableInc.com. There is a website, launchable.com, that you might have visited. It's pretty popular. The company's website is launchableInc.com. So many people are referring to them already as Launchable as well. Anyway, Harpreet, welcome to TechStrong TV. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Very nice to be here.
So Harpreet, as we were talking off camera, of course, I remember interviewing KK when actually it was KK and you.
Right.
The very first day you guys had announced Launchable Inc., right? And what you were looking to do was still kind of in beta, or not even, I wouldn't even call it a beta. It was still sort of in research mode, exactly. Right? And, it's been a few months now, though. Some news has come out. I know KK presented at our DevOps Experience Summit. And you guys have made a decent amount of progress there. Before we get into the progress, though, Harpreet, I want to, for people who maybe haven't seen any of this that I just mentioned, are not familiar with the Launchable and what you guys are trying to do with launchableInc.com. Let's start there. Give us the background, the history. Maybe include a little bit of your own history in there, and we'll go from there.
Sounds great. So Launchable Inc. really started from this, one question that I think every engineering leader faces from his team or her team, which is, you have a small change. Like I have a small change as a developer. Why do I need to run all the tests? Why, it does take a very long time, and it takes it takes a long time to get through them. So why do I need to run them? And so we started looking at this problem, and we figured we could look into this and help engineering teams optimize it, right? And the background for this is Kosuke and me have been in this DevOps CI/CD space for a dozen years, and developer productivity space for more than a dozen years. And we realized that what slows companies and teams down is like this, long testing cycles. And we wanted to come in and help teams optimize that and accelerate consequently. So what Launchable does, quote unquote, is test what matters. We figure out what's important, what's the right test, and help you run those right tests. So one way that I'm recently using talking about this is like insurance, right? Its tests is like, tax. You have to run all of them to kind of get to a place where like you haven't let any bugs through. But if Launchable is like an insurance service, we figure like what the right coverage is at the right risk level and help you make that right trade-off. Right? So that's sort of what Launchable is, and a very, very quick background on why we started the company. About myself, so before Launchable, I was the head of product at Atlassian Bitbucket. So I was there for about a year and a half. And before that, I was at a company called CloudBees, who are the leaders in DevOps. And I was with them for about 8 or 9 years from inception. So I headed product and design there. And I really sort of, my specialty was helping sort of build the DevOps Jenkins kind of monetize open source business. So that's what I did. And prior to that, I was at at Sun Microsystems, and I was a product manager there. And I saw Jenkins there, and I figured like, this is something that the market needs. Why aren't people talking about this? And I essentially sort of bet my career there and said like, let's take this to market. And so that's what I've done. And I was an engineer before that, and so on.
Understood. So Harpreet, and again, I already know the story, but not everyone out here does, right? Yeah. So, yourself, look, you ran product, helped make CloudBees the leader in DevOps Cicd. Kosa KKK is your co-founder, the founder of the Jenkins project, CTO, chief scientist at CloudBees. Clearly, the both of you have had, and then your experience at Atlassian, the both of you have had great insight and communication with lots and lots of organizations who are, trying to do more, be faster, automate more, raise quality, all of the above. And so it gave you both a really unique perspective into where were the real bottlenecks, right? Where were the real problems? And that has kind of allowed you to focus in that with Launchable. But if you wouldn't mind sharing a timeline, if you will, with milestones or significant points along the way. Because a lot of people in our audience, right, they dream about starting a company. They're really smart engineering kind of folks, developers, business folks. And they, everybody, I think, at some point entertains the idea of, I've got a great idea. I think I see where there's a problem. But they don't truly understand what goes into how do you, start a company to help solve problems like this. So share with us a little bit how the genesis, the milestones, timelines, if you will, of how you start with you recognize the issue and then just kind of chip away at the stone and trying to solve these issues and wind up with hopefully a product and a company out of it.
Right. So I'd like to say, like, these are like very discrete steps. One day the light bulb goes off and like you have this idea and then you kind of start executing on it. But that's not how it quite works, right? So so there's no specific date as such where I can go back and say this is where the idea really started. If I go back, maybe a couple of years back, talking to people at CloudBees, we're doing a lot of, Jenkins, we're talking about CI/CD pipelines. We made like CloudBees like #1 there. And then we see in the market, like there is, once an idea becomes successful, funding comes in and we see a plethora of, pipeline companies or CI/CD companies jumping all mushrooming out there, right? And it goes like, okay, this market is mature. If you have like one new startup being forming per day, it's likely we have hit maturity. And so where do we go next? So Kosik and me kind of are really good friends, so we keep going back and forth on these. And one of our things was like, as execs, we sat in various conversations, and we saw like the sales and marketing really is data driven, right? You can actually go in and talk to an enterprise sales leader, and he'll tell you like, okay, it takes me 4.5 months to get a sales rep productive, and after that we'll start showing you X amount of revenue or so on. And marketing has something similar. And so on the engineering side, if you go in and talk to people, it's like, well, engineering is part science, part craft, and so like you're not as data driven as the other organizations. So we were like somewhat embarrassed, and we wanted to bring in the rigor of like data to engineering. And so that's where we started off with. And then as we started thinking about this, we realized that we were helping companies go through these DevOps transformation, and it takes them months and years to kind of go through these. Like, you're running DevOps.com. I'm sure you're hearing this all the time. Like, we are on this cultural transformation that is 8 or 9 months down, and we don't quite have the results to show for it, and so on. All that is good work. And this example predates my next example predates COVID, but I used to say like, okay, the patient is sick, and with DevOps transformation, we are telling them go to the gym, work out, spend 8 or 9 months doing this, then you'll get healthy. But the patient really has a headache going. All he needs is a medicine, right? All he needs is a vaccine at this point. And that's what unshackles them. And we were looking at like, what are those key problems? And we found like testing is not being looked at from that perspective. And as we found out, we talked to a lot of people, and we realized that slow test feedback, what tests to run, are like the key problems that engineering teams face. And we circled around this for a few months, and then we realized like, hey, there is something here. And that's the point where we started thinking about forming the company. And we talked to a few people. We decided to form the company. It so happens that because of KK's and my background, we're somewhat outliers. We were able to raise a seed round, much earlier than typically people would. And so we started thinking about starting the company last June or July, and like in October we had formed the company and we had raised a seed round. Right? So that's sort of where we were at. And the first few months of this journey has been to sort of keep our intuition aside and really go and talk to a lot of people and say like, is our intuition actually matching what we are saying now that we've dedicated our entire working hours to it? And it seems to be matching up, right? So what we've done in the last few months is actually go in and talk to a lot of customers, validated our key hypothesis, validated our algorithms, right? So this is a machine learning company, right? Kind of going back to data. We realized that we can use machine learning and data at this point to go in and solve the testing issues. So that's sort of where we've ended up with.
Okay. So great background stuff. We've got that kind of foundation laid.
Mm-hmm.
As we sit here now, it's Thanksgiving week, November, almost the end of November. Where is the company now, and where do you see, what do you, not long-term, because who knows what, over the next, let's say 6 months, a year at most, how do you see this progressing? And then I'd like you to also, if you can kind of weave it in there, Harpreet, our audience at home, how can they interact with this? How can they kind of help the mission that you and KK are advancing, but also how can they help themselves? Right, by maybe getting in front of this.
Yeah. So great question. So I realize I haven't really talked like what the company specifically does, right? So what we do is, if you have like tests and these tests are automated, we can come in and find what percentage of the test to run to give you the same level of confidence as you normally do, right? So we call this test what matters. Another way to think about this is we eliminate waiting time from tests, right? So it really hones into the problem, like developers are waiting on slow test feedback, or they don't quite know what test to run. We kind of go and solve those problems for them. So that's where we are starting off with. Where we are as a company today is we have a good number of, what you would call design partners who work with us that helps us validate, that our approach and our algorithm works. And a number of them are piloting us today, right? So where we are headed towards, and so where we are today is we are at this point where we are offering early access program to people. So you can come in, can talk to us, we can connect you to the service, and in a few weeks, you can trial the service out. Once the machine learning algorithm learns about your environment, you can start using the product. So if I go, 3 months ahead, we will be looking at sort of GAing this product that is, generally available to teams out there. And if you look like 6 to 9 months, a year ahead, you're essentially just kind of, building more and more polish on this and sort of improving the algorithm further. So that's sort of where we are at today. Now, to your question, how can people help themselves today? So a lot of people that we talk to, Alan, like they have this problem. It's like we're waiting on tests to take some time. Now, if you're a big company, it may translate as, well, my developers wait a few hours to a few days, right? And that's a lot of time. And if you're a small company and you're like looking at this and going like, I have 30-minute tests, but it takes me like 20 minutes, if I could reduce that to 5 minutes, my developers could go much, much faster. So if your sort of listeners are in that sort of camp, they don't have much in terms of solutions today. And it would be the right time to engage with us and connect with us and, figure out whether the algorithm works for them, right? So that's sort of the call to arms would be to come back and contact us to, try the product out.
So let's be clear, though, make sure we lay the breadcrumbs correctly. They should go to launchableiNC.com to the website. And where on the, is there a place on the website where it says?
There is a button called Get Early Access. And you can, press on the button to get early access invite there, and we'll contact you. Or you can, email info@launchableiNC.com that you want to try out, and we'll reach out back to you about that. The website actually talks about a few things. We have like a few case studies that we've done with customers. There's a white paper that helps you understand sort of how the algorithm works and so on. So they can look at that, sort of, educate themselves. I think the key thing here is this notion of how do you use what we call predictive test selection? Like, how do you predict what test to run? And that's sort of a new branch. So people might need to sort of get their heads wrapped around the concept. So the website actually calls some of those pieces out for them.
Excellent. Excellent. And Harpreet, does it make a difference how big the organization is? Is there a particular size or verticals that you guys are looking to focus in on at first, or is it not important?
It's actually not important. So the beauty of what we've done is our approach is tech agnostic. So you could be on any programming language, you could be on any platform, and we would work for you. What we just need is the tests need to be automated, such that this becomes part and parcel of the workflow. And what we've seen is we have like people who are like the big car companies in our product, in our design partner program, and we have like one people startup in our design partner program. Okay. So the key question to ask yourself is like, are my developers waiting a long time that I should be optimizing for, right? And if you have that problem, you can come back to us.
I saw an interesting study the other day, last week. I was talking about it with someone. The fact of the matter is, according to this survey anyway, when we look at, enterprises, only about 25% of testing is automated. And the interesting thing is, like 7-8 years ago, it was 25%. So even with the onset of DevOps and everything around automation and continuous testing, we haven't seen a corresponding spike or rise in the amount of testing which is automated. It's remained relatively static these last few years. So, one may ask, well, before I improve the automated testing you're doing, how can we get you to do more automated testing, right? Or why aren't we doing more automated testing? What's your thoughts on that?
That's a very interesting point. It could very well be an hour-long conversation in itself. So just highlighting a few things.
Keep it short, and we'll jump into it on another conversation, maybe. But if you can, I mean, just
I recently did a webinar. It's on our website where I was talking about like the state of like testing and DevOps, right? And I think Gartner has a similar number, about 25%, but their prediction is by 2023, 75% of the organizations will have automated testing. So that's what they see the market to go to. And why has this been so static? I think it has a couple of things. One has been the maturity of CI/CD itself, right? For something like automated testing to work, you need your Jenkins pipeline to be set up. You need that entire end-to-end workflow to be set up. And that's what has happened in the last 4 or 5 years. So, people, it's the same set of people who are making those choices. And so they are optimizing for building that pipeline before they go into like automation. The second, so I think the market is getting to the place where you'll need more and more automation, and you will have more and more automation. Actually, we are talking to somebody who are like, okay, we are automating our services in the next 4 weeks and we'll be back to you. And they were back kind of doing that conversation. The next thing is really the challenge has been like, people have finite amount of time, right? And it's like, what challenges do you pick up, right? And this was one of our underlying philosophy as well, is like, you cannot go in and tell these DevOps team to go hire 5 more people to write automated tests. So what needs to happen is you need to give back their time, right? So we are talking to a few organizations where just because we could reduce their entire cycle time by 40%, right? You can now use that 60% resources to go do something else. And in their case, in some cases, it is like, we need to write more tests, or we need to fix these flaky tests that we never had time on, or we need to go write some features, right? So that's sort of like, you're hitting like one of our sort of key thinking behind is like, once we give back these time, you can go in and clean house, because you have that time now.
Sure. Yeah. Excellent. So Harpreet, I tried to keep these to 20 minutes. We're a little over.
Okay.
But we're going to need to continue that conversation.
Yeah.
And we will come back to it. But I want to leave people with the call to action here, which is go to launchableinc.com, hit join our, what was the button say? Join our program, or?
Early invite. Early invite,
enroll in it. Check out the case studies, the webinars, and everything else. It's refreshing to see someone or a new company take a big swing at the plate to fix, right?
Yeah,
fundamental issues. And so keep us posted. We'll have you back on soon. Enjoy the holiday. Say hello to KK for us.
Yeah, will do. Thank you very much.
All right. Harpreet Singh here, CEO. Is it CEO co-founder?
Co-CEO, co-founder.
Co-CEO, co-founder. Launchable Inc. That's launchableinc.com. Here on TechStrong. We'll be right back with our next guest.
Thank you.
Welcome back, guys. Next up, we have a previously enjoyed episode of Devops Unbound, featuring Mark Settle, author, Mitch Ashley of ASG, Louise Mccarthy, who's the CIO advisor, and Evelyn Orlick of Devops Institute. They're going to be talking about usability and accessibility in design in DevOps. So give this one a listen.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Devops Unbound. Devops Unbound is brought to us by our friends at Tricentis. So thanks for their sponsorship. But, you know, they sponsor, but we pick the topics, we pick the guests, and we have a lot of fun here talking about relevant topics around DevOps. Today's topic centers around DevOps and digital transformation at the C level. And let me introduce you to our panel. First of all, we have Louise Mccarthy. And Louise, I'm going to ask you to kind of introduce yourself, a little background for our audience.
Yes, and hi everybody. I'm Louise McCarthy. My background more recently is doing large complex digital transformations, mainly for the financial services. So mainly through the eyes of the business rather than the technology, although I have held roles as CFO and I've held roles COO and CIO as well.
Excellent. Next, we have Mark Settle. Mark, welcome.
So I am a 7-time CIO, and I most recently left Okta about a year ago and have been advising startup companies since then. I'm based here in Silicon Valley, and probably my encounters with DevOps are focused on supporting DevOps teams in terms of infrastructure requirements that they have, and also introducing the concept into actually business application support within a conventional kind of an IT group.
Thank you and welcome. And then Evelyn Orlick. Evelyn, please.
Yes, hello there. Evelyn Ehrlich. I'm the Chief Research Director at the Devops Institute. Before that, I spent 13 years as Vice President at Forrester Research, studying a variety of topics, and DevOps, of course, was one of them, working with many enterprises and C-levels and others to explore the challenges and the fun of DevOps.
Very good. Never heard anyone talk about the fun of DevOps, but I'm looking forward to discussing that. And then last but not least, of course, is my co-host here on Devops Unbound, Mitch Ashley of Accelerated Strategies Group. Mitchell.
Great. Good to be here. I'm Mitch Ashley, CEO of Accelerated Strategies. We focus on digital transformation, DevOps, cloud native, and cybersecurity. I'm also a former CIO, not nearly as experienced as Mark is, but have led transformations and also implementation of DevOps, as well as been a CTO, CEO of product companies. So I've lived on both sides of DevOps.
Great. What a great panel we have today. I'm really looking forward to it. So we're talking about DevOps at the C level. As I mentioned to you all before we started today's show, you know, our friend Gary Groover wrote a book, Leading the Transformation. He wrote several books. One of them was Leading the Transformation. And Gary is a big proponent of what he calls the top-down approach to DevOps and digital transformation. And in Gary's view, and I'm not saying right or wrong, in Gary's view, you cannot have a successful digital transformation or DevOps transformation without, excuse me, sponsorship, support, air cover, if you will, from the C level, including the CIO or CTO, depending on the organization, CEO, etc. Let's start there. Is C-level support absolutely, positively required to have a successful transformation? Anybody?
Do you mind if I go first, Alan?
Sure.
I mean, I would actually see my recent transfer. I've done about 5 or 6 transformations and tried all sorts of ways to actually get them going. There's always blockers on the way, and it's usually the blockers that slows the whole problem down. And the blockers either come from the ground up, from the employees or the people that run the processes today, or you get the blockers in terms of the C-level suite people who tend to want to own things and it's a bit of ego that actually blocks things going that way. And the most recent transformation was successfully owned by the C-suite. So they drove it, they owned it, they were the stakeholders. But the most of the engagement actually came from the employees, from the process owners. So we ran the whole transformation from the process owners actually owning and identifying where the transformation needs to take place. And that really made it hugely successful, because you didn't have people feeling for their own jobs. Because with digital transformation, it always means, or often means, that there's going to be heads that unfortunately are lost in various areas of the transformation, but mainly doing transactional type work. But if it's the transactional people that are running the processes, they highlight their pain points, and then we work with them to actually change those pain points into something positive. So I would arguably say both from top down, but also if you don't do it with engagement of the people running the processes today, it won't work.
So I'll chime in. I think I have the same answer, but stated in a slightly different way. I think the way the question gets asked, it sounds as if, the CTO or the CIO is going to come down from the mountain with the DevOps tablets and then mass the employees and team members. Yea and verily, I've been converted, and now it's your turn. Like, we're all going to go do this together. Most of the time that doesn't work. I mean, for one person to come in, well, take an example where a startup company here that's been reasonably successful, maybe they get up to a product team of, I don't know, engineering team of 500 people or something like that. They hire a new chief product officer or a chief technology officer who says, we're going to do this completely different. I have a vision, etc. Well, they're going to do it, but that's going to be a slog to kind of get there. But what I have seen be more successful is almost like, what's the right term in a battle when you send the beach guy on, the beach master, right? That's like moving people around. So you really want almost like a fifth column movement down at the grassroots level of people who are genuinely interested in exploring these new ways of doing business. And then I think what the C-level person adds are the methodological resources to drive scale. And so many DevOps initiatives fail because they sound interesting, they sound contemporary. People think, well, other people do it, so it must be beneficial. But then after like 18 months, everybody scratches their head. Where are the benefits? Like, we thought this was going to be transformational. And it's not. The technical people are having fun. They've developed this new terminology, et cetera. And if you scratch below the surface, well, guess what? You're doing DevOps in like 5 different ways because the little seed groups have all picked the tool they wanted and, decided that they're going to have a daily scrum twice a week or, whatever. They've got their own little process set up. And then people say, like, where's the benefit? Like, this was supposed to be transformational. So at some point in the early stage of the journey, it's needed to drive scale and that level of endorsement. But I think it can almost backfire if it's launched like from the brain of Mark Settle that this, yea and verily, I want to lead you to the promised land.
Sort of a Charlton Heston beard I'm picturing on you there, Mark. Evelyn, how about you?
Yeah, I actually would say it should be outcome-driven DevOps. It doesn't really matter if it is from the C-level, from the individual, from the inside out, from the outside in, from the top to the bottom to the top, from the middle to the whatever. It needs to be it needs to be outcome-driven. What I mean by that is only metrics will make us change. Just like I drive through my town here. This is a little analogy. I drive through my town here. They installed one of those things where they measure the speed, and if you go over 50 km/h, you get a ticket. Well, my husband, even though that thing has been there for 2 years, my husband manages to get a ticket every 3 months. But what he does is he intercepts the mail, and then he doesn't tell me that he has gotten that ticket. So now what I have done to stop those 15 euro tickets every 2 months, because, if you add it up, you can go for a nice dinner. I am going to go to the mail before he gets home, so I see how many tickets he gets, and he gets little little lines. And that metric is on the refrigerator. I should have brought a picture of it. And that has actually reduced how he is driving through town. And so if you go back to the DevOps teams and the digital transformation, and you ask the individuals at C-level or VP level or practitioner level, how successful have you been, or what's the challenges around? It's easy to point to somebody, but data, if you have data, which shows where you are, and it maps to where you want to go, and you share that amongst all these different individuals, there is no argument. It's not the guy with the long beard, as Mark would come in, or it is not somebody at the lowest level who could argue with that. We could huddle around it and figure it out. What do we need to do? So I think it's not really about who. Of course, we do need some individuals who pays for it. We need some kind of a fund and budget and all of that. But I really think it's outcome driven rather than organizational level driven.
Can I just chime in on that one too? So I would agree 100%. And outside of maybe the CTO or CPO or IT organization, bringing evidence of improved sophistication, operational metrics around the process to almost any other C-level executive, I hate to say, they don't really care. It doesn't. The CFO, if you show that, I don't know, the Jira throughput, the story, whatever, it's like in one of my books, it's like reading a Bible to the cat. The cat will look at you and feign interest, but have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. And that's sort of, once you get outside the technical functions, everybody, that's your job. That's the way, you figure out the way work needs to get done. And again, to your point, it's more of a business outcome. Are we actually getting customer request enhancements through in greater quantity? Were we able to respond to a competitor's new feature set faster than we did at their last release cycle, or whatever those things are? That's what people want to talk about. Exactly.
Yeah, and I totally agree. At the end of the day, the outcomes is aligned to the strategy of the organization. So you've got to be doing a transformation for a reason, and there's usually 3 or 4 reasons why you're doing a transformation. It's around the customer journey, so the customer needs to improve the satisfaction. You've got to cut your costs. You're trying to grow your revenue, and then the one that's usually an outliner that's becoming up running at the moment is carbon emissions. So for every one of these pain points that I mentioned earlier, there should be a business case that shows measurement of success against each of those 4 measures. And that's what you bottom up, you report the top level to the C-suite to say, this is why we're doing it. This is the measure of success of what we're doing it. And even breaking some of the pain points and the business cases down to quick wins. So ones that you can be getting on with relatively quickly that free up cash that then can pay for the more strategic type things.
Yeah. So I think this brings up, all 3 of you have touched on it, and it brings up what I think is really sort of an entry question, right? Which is it's the genesis of digital transformation. Why and how does any organization decide to go through the potential pain, heartache, and change of digitally transforming, of adopting DevOps or Agile? Louise, I'm pretty sure we spoke about this. Was it at an Emmett Keefe Insight Ignite in Iceland?
Yes,
that you were at?
Yes.
I was there with you, and I remember talking to you about this. Yeah. Evelyn, in your day, someone like Mark might go to a Forrester conference and come back and say, wow, Evelyn Orlick from Forrester just presented this presentation study on the benefits of digital transformation and DevOps adoption. And God darn it, she described us to the T. We really need to do that here. And maybe that worked then, right? 7 years ago, 10 years ago. I don't know if that's the genesis of digital transformation today. I think a lot of time digital transformation today does start with technical champions lower down, whispering in Mark's ear, man, we could, if we were doing DevOps or Agile or whatever, we could really change, we could really make better customer experiences. We can give customers what they want. We could do it better, cheaper, faster.
Alan, I think we have a chasm that we have to cross, and that is DevOps can be sort of a vanity project for the IT or the development organization, right? It can be a purely self-interest. We're doing what we do better, which is always a good thing. But and at the end of the day, does it move the needle for the business? You have to be able to translate that into what Evelyn I think said was the why. Louise also said the why. But what is the real benefit we're trying to get out of it? When you have a purpose for doing it, now you have metrics you can put around that. Is it revenue? Is it competitiveness? Is it responsiveness to the market? Is it changing customer expectations and behaviors? What is it? That's truly then the development of the IT organization knows that they're making a difference. Otherwise, how do you know whether you should be working on more releases per hour, per day, or you should be working on just fixing the backlog? How do you know? You don't, other than just sort of your own internal metrics. And I guess it kind of reminds me of that phrase of the, was a belly button gazing, right? You're sort of looking at yourself and what you think's important. But I think that connection, you have to cross that chasm, whether the business is coming to you or you have an idea of what we can do better and how it might help. And let's then make that connection.
But that's my point. Like someone like Mark, what does it take to push you over the edge and say, God darn it, we got to do this?
That's a good point.
We're committed.
So just, let me tackle that one in a second. One thing that's funny about this whole line of conversation is, of course, in the world that I live in out here, people, there's no question about doing it. It's like, who is the most
giving
or more sophisticated? So in the war for talent, that same 500-person organization I referenced, they might look at each other and say, like, who do we know at Google or Facebook, in their engineering group? Like, we've got to, we know we should be doing this better. We've kind of played around with the concept. We've hired some lower level people who said, like, you guys are just, behind the times here. So we need some real leadership in this area. Secondly, that's the other side of the coin, and in parts of the country where maybe it's like an accepted practice, there's almost a competition to be the most sophisticated or get the most benefit. But the spark plug, the question you've asked, I'm thinking about some second tier markets, and I really hate to call out, specific locales, but what the hell, as a consultant, you can talk like that. So,
sure.
If you're like in a place like St. Louis and you're in an organization that just has done the business the same way forever, all the IT management, all the technical management has come up through the ranks, kind of doing things the old fashioned way, quarterly releases, and they don't keep the same kind of metrics that you would in a DevOps environment. To blow a place like that up, there'd have to be some kind of a competitive imperative, or the white knight does show up from time to time, right? So if you think about it, sometimes when the new CPO or the CTO comes in, and I've experienced this in my own career, there'll be a cause or an initiative that I've promoted during my entire tenure. The new guy or gal comes in and they get it done like in a year. And I think, like, what the heck happened here? There was one company where I was trying to get them off of Microsoft Dynamics and get them onto Salesforce. There's another company I was trying to get production systems up into the cloud. And we did every kind of seed activity you can imagine. We sent the cloud one, we sent people up to Redmond for some AWS instruction. We did some prototyping, et cetera. New CIO comes in and says, we're going to the cloud. 12 months later, like half the production systems are in the cloud. How did that happen? So sometimes the change at the top, which gets us back to where this kind of started, maybe that is the seminal spark plug. And especially if that person's been brought in because there's a broader C-level recognition that we're not keeping up with the times. We need to make some kind of change. So you have that broader support. When people start to whine, they know that the whining's not going to get them out of the change that's about to come. But for just self-generated change for people that have, then I go back to, Mitch, what you said, then you can always have a vanity project, which is, you can point to as evolutionary. Like, we've got a small group, they're putting their toe in the water, they're doing some interesting things. So we are keeping up with the times, but then you just don't get the scale benefits, at the end of the day.
I think there is, to add to something to what Mark said, as the ecosystem of our organizations has expanded, right? We have, just think of the travel industry doesn't exist at this point in time, but think of maybe manufacturing, right? In the area where I'm in Stuttgart, we have large car manufacturers, and they're connected to Bosch and others, and the ecosystem is rather broad. And these folks at all levels are collaborating, connecting, not as much now with where we are, but they have exchanged thoughts and ideas. They go to events and they learn from each other at all the different levels. And so I think there is that, as Mark said, to some extent, there is this not really a competition, but the exchange of ideas, which has brought additional adoption of DevOps at all levels, right? So if I am the C-level of Bosch and I go to a autonomic car driving event and I meet the CF C-level of the CF industry down in Friedrichshafen, and they're telling me about, wow, we really improved our reliability scores, and we have really punched up our cadence around the product X, Y, and Z. I go back and I say to my team, hey, I just met this team over there. They're doing something fantastic. Can we start? It's that spark, which to some extent happens to cross over in this ecosystem as we start to be much more connected and dependent. I think that's one point. The other one is, if you look at the individuals who are today in IT, they don't look like this anymore. I'm a COBOL, Pascal, HP 3000 JCL person. That's when I grew up. That's my heritage in operations. The guys and the girls today in these teams, they are completely different. They are, they want Python. They want to do sexy things. They want to do fun things. They want to show what they can do, and they're looking for inspirations from their leaders as well. And they want to see that they can make a difference. I think that is also, from a cultural perspective, I think, of course it's important, but I think that's also a driving force. And that's not just the individual contributors, but also the consultants and the C-levels who are, I call them the flip-flop wearing chino looking guys who go to the conferences, right? Which we've seen them, I'm like, oh, I think I'm overdressed with my suit. That's the people who actually make DevOps happen, and they want to have fun. They want to do things. They don't want to do JCL and things like I did in a boring ops group, dying of boredom.
I think you're talking about a couple of things, Evelyn. One is the attracting talent, right? If the people have more selection, economic conditions aside, more selectivity about the kind of work that they want to do, the companies that they want to work for. There's also just, how do you learn to develop software? If DevOps is what you're coming into, a way of developing software, you're looking for organizations and you expect that approach. So I think your point is right on. It's also the audience of the people who are going to be the adopters or the embracers or the champions of doing this. So that all makes a big difference. The command from on high, as Mark was talking about, the tablets, there's an expression for that. This too shall pass, right? That's the reaction usually of those kinds of initiatives. You have to have adoption. And I think you spoke to that really well.
So I tell you, look, if you're a Silicon Valley cool kid, or you work at one of these organizations where flip-flops and jeans are the rule, and then you do the hair thing and all of that. I don't do that so well anymore. That's cool. But Louise, you've done transformations at what we may think of as large, stodgy financial organizations, right? And they're not Silicon Valley based, and they're not a jeans and flip-flop culture. So how does it play there?
Well, actually, funny you were talking about flip-flops, high fives and cappuccino. I worked in government actually for a little while in the tax authority, and that was a time when the government was setting up its group digital or global digital authority, and everybody in the government, all of a sudden they changed from suits to wearing flip-flops and high fives and cappuccinos, and it was like a world away from the starchy government. But anyway, moving on to the financial services. Yeah, I mean, financial services, I've been lucky enough actually to do transformation in some legacy financial services. I mean, the big boys like the HSBCs, for example, which is complex. It's like turning the Titanic around. And I've often written articles around, it's like moving deck chairs around. The reason why I say that is because automation is the way forward. You know, we talk about automation in many guises. Automation takes out people, it takes out transactional type activities, but the legacy banks are just struggle to do it. So I say it's like moving the deck chairs around Titanic because of the legacy systems they've got. Transformation, they talk about it, they move things around, but nothing real and concrete actually comes out of the transformation, which is really sad because, you know, there's great opportunities there in the legacy banks. And on the other side of the fence, I'm working currently with a contender bank, a digital bank, which is new, it's fresh, it's green. It's almost as green as your screen there, Alan. It's a greenfield site, and it's great to be able to take the whole end-to-end customer journey and see it digitalized, and how quickly you can change and transform and you know, developing and changing technology with that suite that's end to end. It's just awesome to be able to see how quickly it happens, whereas the legacy banks are still thinking about planning it, talking about it, cogitating over it, when the small guys are out with the new technology. And one of the things that I'm often transforming whenever I do my transformation, it's not transformation is for Christmas, it's for life in my mindset. So it's around continuously thinking about the innovation. And it's about encouraging these legacy banks to have innovation departments that are constantly thinking about the new technology that's out there to take them ahead of their competitors. So like these digital banks, you know, if the legacy banks are doing this, but actually seeing a way of making it happen quickly. And I think that's the problem that they're constantly battling with, the bureaucratic slowness of moving Titanic.
Yeah.
So clearly the kind of organization you're at determines or will have a huge impact on this. Guys, we're coming on the backside of our time limit here. I wanted to talk a little bit about, okay, we've made the decision. We are moving forward with our transformation. We are adopting DevOps and Agile and you know, these new ways. How at the C-level do we, short of coming down from the mountain with the two tablets in God's own writing, how do we, you know, translate that to the troops? How do we affect the organization that, you know, this isn't some passing fancy of the CIO, and it's not going to pass, you know, in the next quarter. This is really the way we're doing it. How do you make that change, you know, down the ranks, get people adopting as champions and being successful with it? Mark?
You know, it's not unlike an initiative around security. When you talk about cultural change within an organization, you know, I think leaders don't always appreciate what a huge impact they have on the people that they lead. You know, people take cues from the way you use your time, the things that you show interest in, things you follow up on. Yeah, I mean, your time management sends tons of signals to the organization. And some of the operational metrics that I poo-pooed before as being of no interest whatsoever to people outside the technical areas, you know, are a great way to kind of keep score. You go back to what Evelyn said. So if there's a sense like we're making progress, and some of those celebrations can be really important. I'll just leave you with a thought. I mean, I worked with a guy several years ago who used to say, he said, what interests my boss fascinates me. And, you know, as long as there's some sustained interest, and to go back to Ellen, what you said before, I didn't just come back from the Forrester meeting all jazzed up, and then like 2 months later, I go to a Gartner meeting, and now I'm on a whole different tangent. Now I think it's, you know, it's automation. We got to get our P robots in here. That's going to like blow the business up. And then people in the trenches are like, this too shall pass. He'll go to another meeting, you know, but I'm not going to get my.
And come back with some other toy, yeah.
Do some crazy thing.
Yeah, I used to feel it was whatever was the last book I read, right? That was the next greatest thing to me, right? Because I just read that book. But Evelyn, fundamentally, and this is something, right, the DevOps Institute is deeply ingrained in it. It also becomes a question of how do we upskill our workforce? How do we prepare? Do we just go out and hire new people? That's hard. Do we upskill our existing people for this? What, at the C level, how do we affect that?
Yeah, so from our research at the DevOps Institute, we know that most organizations are actually preferring to leverage their existing resources to train them, right, and to upskill them. Now, upskilling, of course, has its challenges because you don't just upskill around processes of learning a new way of doing continuous delivery, or it's not just about upskilling new technical skills, it's also about human skills. So that's, I think, the challenge. A lot of organizations are biting themselves into that, or pushing themselves, or actually locking themselves into the corner. They think, yeah, let's give them AWS training. Let's let them understand what the latest DevOps platform is, and give them some language skills around whatever the latest hotshot technology programming language is. But it's also soft skills or human skills which are necessary. People need to understand how to work empathetic, how to collaborate, how to connect, how to cross functional borders, how to understand when a security individual tells me something. So, having skills around different categories is important. And there is investment needed. We see that unfortunately 7% of survey participants we had last year said that they have no idea what their upskilling programs are. We know 37% of these individuals, a very large sample size of almost 1,200, said that we don't have a program in upskilling, and the rest of them either are planning one or have one. So that's really, unfortunately, poor and not enough. So anybody listening in, get ready to upskill your people, start thinking about training, start thinking about exchanging knowledge and allowing them to learn, give time. I, for myself, and we're doing that at the DevOps Institute a little more, and our CEO does that a little as well. I call Friday my learning day. And it doesn't matter what happens. Unless the CEO wants me there, Friday is my learning day. I learn French, I learn about design thinking, and I'm learning about metrics. That's it. And we all have to do that. It's very important.
Agreed. Louise, you go in as a consultant. What, in terms of the skill level of the workforce, do you try to upskill them? Do you supplement it with fresh talent? It's hard. I mean, getting fresh talent in, Mark, in the Valley, they cut each other's throats for this. How do you do that?
I mean, it's an interesting thing because you're trying to fly an aircraft while changing the engine in some cases. And it's the same people transform are the same people that need to run and drive the aircraft. And also, if you brought in too much fresh talent, then you would probably put the nose of the joint of the people that are supposed to be helping you run the process anyway. So the way I've done it is I've gone in and we've identified some highly skilled people that know the processes really well, and then supplement them with some more transactional process mappers and people like that, so that those people that run the processes can also see things like how do they do the process mapping, how do they identify the pain points, how do they convert it into business cases, how do they use it and then convert it into technology. So on that journey, the people that are running their processes are also being upskilled at the same time into continuous improvement and transformation. But I say that there's also, it's not about upskilling necessarily on all sorts of things, because as technology is changing, there's less the need for upskilling, because a lot of technology is self-serve type technology now. A lot of the RPA tooling now, people can do it like they learn Excel, like they learn, Word and things like that. So the upskilling, like it used to be about, spending months and months, programming and that type of thing. There's less the need for that. It's more about the upskilling in terms of continuous improvement. And it's a cultural change, I think somebody mentioned earlier. So it is going in and using the resources that are there, upskilling those people and slightly supplementing them and doing hands-on job training.
Excellent. Mark, Mitchell, I'm going to give you each a chance to kind of close it out here, and then I think we're about out of time. Mark, final thoughts?
Well, let me just make a final comment, on along the lines of this last topic. And I've done through many of these reskilling things, and seeding that group with new talent, I think, is essential. I mean, if somebody came into me and said, I don't know, we're gonna go to DevOps, and we're gonna you can have consultant money. The consultants will come in, they'll be here 90 days, 120 days. I mean, this is an acquired skill. It's almost an art form, at its finest. And the devil is in the details. And the day the consultants leave, everybody's left to their own devices. And it'd be just like saying, well, let's just shut down the data center and move everything in the data center up onto AWS, and we'll get some AWS consulting in here, and then they'll leave after 90 days, and you guys run all the production systems up there, in that whole new environment after 90 days of familiarization. I don't think too many companies would take that kind of a risk. So I think people get so carried away with thinking that, reskilling can be effective, that people will come to embrace it. And I hate to say this, but in my personal experience, if you reskill a population of people, 20% will be superstars, 20% won't get it, and 60% will be good enough. But if one of the 60% left, you'd recruit somebody in with a higher skill level than the person that left. So they make forward progress, and I'm not denigrating, people's commitment to new things, but you've got to bring in that fresh talent that's been there and done that. They kind of know what it's supposed to look like, right? And they can look around a corner and they can see the big fuzzy hole in the road that we're all going to fall into here in the next 2 months. So that's my.
Mitchell, you want to bring it home?
Yeah, I'd like to just wrap with the human element, maybe from a little different perspective. Change, people react to change in different ways. Your advocates, great, they're all about it. Your resistors, love them, because you can actually work on that. You can help. You can help bring them along. It's that passive, unspoken middle ground. The folks that are waiting to see, before I commit myself, I'm not going to put myself, my job, my career at risk for this next thing. I don't know if I can do it. And the idea of bringing people in, I think one of the main purposes is to show the team, A, it can be done, and B, they can learn it. So it isn't bring the consultants in for 30 days, hand over what they did, and everybody goes, now what do I do, right? So I think if you can de-risk, address the fear of what this means, that you're going to be able to do it, and we're going to stick with you to help you get there, help everybody get there. And if there's some folks that choose not to go along the journey, that's okay too, but we're all in this together. I think you've got to address the human element from a very personal, how does each person feel about this and whether they're signed on to do it? And that's going to guide your success. That's been my experience.
Absolutely. Well, guys, we're about out of time. Mark, Evelyn, Louise, and of course, Mitchell, thanks for joining us on this episode of Devops Unbound. Many thanks to our friends at Tricentis for their sponsorship. Until next time, this is Alan Schimmel for Devops Unbound. Be well, be safe, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Hey everybody, happy Thursday and welcome to today's edition of the Thursday headlines. We have a lot of great stories on all three of our sites, but here's what we have most recently. Up on devops.com, first of all, we have an article that talks about the need for governance and quality in DevOps. As more businesses are embracing digital transformation for survival in today's work from home and increasingly digital online landscape, developers are under tremendous pressure to release code faster. But in the rush, many times vulnerabilities are introduced that can do a lot of damage. There needs to be a balance between speed and quality. According to the article, the key to ensuring governance and quality in DevOps is to have an integrated automated workflow orchestration into the software development lifecycle process. That also reduces the amount of manual effort and time pressure that is inherent in so many application development processes today. Automated workflow orchestration enables developers or DevOps teams to test early and often and ensures releases and updates are ready to go to a live production environment. That ensures quality and governance for every build and release. We also have yet another take at ways organizations can help foster an environment of collaboration between developers and their security teams. It seems to be an ongoing sharks versus jets problem, a little West Side Story reference there, and it's impacting the speed, quality, and security of application development. Developers see security as an impediment to getting code out quickly, and security folk don't necessarily understand how they can slip into the development process without slowing things down. The answer? It's a healthy dose of education on both sides. That's a great first step. Learning from each other by walking a mile in each other's shoes, so to speak. And then by actually learning, security can learn programming languages and how applications are developed, while developers can learn about secure coding practices and attackers' tactics. Both can go a long way to bridging the chasm that currently exists in so many organizations. Earlier in the week, Tuesday as a matter of fact, I promised a passel of news coming from the AWS reInvent 2020 conference. Well, AWS didn't make me a liar, making a plethora of announcements ranging from new DevOps ways of working to building its own silicon. Among the new offerings announced is Amazon DevOps Guru, a fully managed operations service. It uses machine learning to automatically detect operational issues and recommend specific actions for remediation. That, the company said, makes it easier for developers to improve application availability. Also announced is AWS Proton, a service to automate the development and deployment of microservices-based applications that are built using containers and the AWS Lambda serverless computing framework. AWS is adding a slew of infrastructure options as well, including a Mac instances for Amazon Elastic Computing Cloud offering. Built on Mac mini computers, the service will make it possible for developers to more cost-effectively build Mac OS applications. And really, who doesn't want that? Over on Container Journal, Weaveworks has updated its platform for GitOps to include support for any Kubernetes cluster. Previously, Weave Kubernetes platform was only available on Weaveworks' own Kubernetes distribution. This broadens the landscape for Weaveworks and bolsters support for GitOps-based workflows, which in the past hasn't been much of an option for app dev teams for a few reasons. But as Kubernetes provides a layer of abstraction that offers a level of consistency across different platforms, code can be pulled automatically from a repository, which is the core tenet of GitOps. Weaveworks is one of many organizations getting behind the idea of a GitOps future in application development, one that could put the future of DevOps into question. I expect we'll be hearing a lot more about the evolution of GitOps and DevOps in the months to come. Over on Security Boulevard, our legal guru, Mark Rash, takes a look at a case involving data scraping, namely whether it's a legal business move or a violation of intellectual property laws. The case in question involves Facebook and a Chrome extension called UpVoice from a company called Total Brands. The extension scrapes Facebook and Instagram information and sends that information to Brand Total, which it then sells to other companies. Facebook has repeatedly tried to stop Brand Total from using the extension, shutting down the company's social media sites, locking out the extension, removing it from the Google extension store, and disabling the functionality. But like a bad penny, Brand Total keeps coming back to life. In fact, it has sued Facebook and tried to get a temporary restraining order against the company. The court's ruling was interesting. It said Facebook had the right to require that entities that accessed its user data get its consent to ensure that the privacy and the security of the platform itself were protected. So by not getting prior authorization, Brand Total might be violating the terms of the Federal Computer Trespass or Hacking Law and could be subject to both civil and criminal liability. Privacy. Talk about the pot calling the kettle black there. Brand Total was unsuccessful in getting its restraining order, but the case is far from over. And in the spirit of the holiday season, which is now officially upon us, we have an article that looks at the ways e-commerce providers, easy for me to say, can protect themselves and their platforms from code injection and other attacks during this ever important online shopping free-for-all. Content security policies are becoming the norm, which is a good thing, but they have limitations that hackers are increasingly getting around. Behavioral technologies could be the answer. They use machine learning to establish patterns of normal and abnormal application behavior across billions of interactions and thousands of websites. Where CSPs might prevent unfamiliar connections or URLs from accessing site resources, behavioral analysis can detect malicious behavior even in allowed and familiar scripts. Plus, a behavioral view can augment and even automate CSPs to make them work better and improve the security posture of web applications. Combined, behavioral technologies and CSPs can be a powerful security combination for online retailers. All right, that's it for today's version of the headlines. Just a quick reminder, today is the FinCon Virtual Summit that is being sponsored by MediaOps. So if you get a chance, pop on over to the sites and get signed up. Check it out. It's definitely worth a little bit of your time at least. But for now, I'll see you back here on Monday with the next version of the headlines. And until then, please stay safe.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everybody, welcome back to TechStrong TV. I am Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am here now with Philippe Humeau, who is the founding CEO of a company called Crowdsec. Philippe, thank you so much for taking a few minutes and talking with me today. Really do appreciate it.
My pleasure.
I am so interested in learning about your company, and I'm sure the audience is as well. This is a great idea, crowdsourcing security, kind of that hive mentality, if you will. Tell me about Crowdsec. Tell me how you guys got started and what you're all about there.
Yeah, so my team and I, we are pretty much professional security for like 10 to 20 years, depending on the profiles. And we had those problems. We faced those problems ourselves because we had a hosting company before, and we had to deal with this day in, day out, So we wanted to have something that people could carry home, use home, or in a small network. What we created before was something very complicated, which required a lot of DevOps, SecOps, compliances, licenses, and all. So it could not be by any means something you could install within your premises. You had to be hosted by us. So we wanted, with Thibault, my co-founder and CTO, we wanted to have something that could help anyone and everyone easily by just installing it. And we found out that actually, if we want to solve the problem in a universal way, if you want, we have to have it puts certain constraints in the systems. So for example, if you want to be able to protect assets from the generation of the 90s or 80s even, up until the latest generation watch or phone or IoT device or whatever, the only common point to all of them is that they can speak web, they can speak HTTP. This is the sole and only point that link them all. So we had to have a solution that could answer instantly or in milliseconds if yes or no you could trust a peer and have a discussion exchange with this peer without taking any risk, And then it became quite obvious that the crowd would play a huge role in putting a reputation on each and all IPs that you could peer with. And when you establish a connection, you just have to make one web query and you get an answer whether this person is trustworthy or not as per our network.
Interesting. So obviously this is an open source solution. And how do you kind of gain more people into your network? I mean, is it just kind of word of mouth, or do you have some sort of process for encouraging people to join, or how are you doing that?
Well, you're the front line. I mean, you media, you Charlene, and all the audience and the people sharing word to mouth definitely is the first line by far. I mean, the security influencers are the best vector for us. And the incentive they get, the incentive that people get into stepping into the network because they don't have to share their signals. They can just use the behavior engine for themselves, like Fail2Ban did in the past, and then they don't have to share anything with us. But if they want to share with us and have this flying wheel turning for everyone, getting some IP fed to themselves and sharing the IPs that they found were nefarious to their system with us, then this whole thing is the incentive for people to start using the product in the first place, because it's a bit like Waze. When 20% were using Waze in, I don't know, Toronto, it was useless. When 200 started to do it, it was like, okay, you could have here and there insights about the traffic. When 20,000 were doing it, you couldn't do anything but use Waze. So it's exactly what we're trying to create here, a snowball with enough users so that the network is totally real time and can give you insight like a huge hacker interferometer, if you want.
Wow, that's a great idea. I really, really like it. Now, how long have you guys been around? How long has this particular technology been kind of in operation, if you will?
Well, the behavior part exists for more than 20 years, more or less.
Sure.
We modernized it and we stitched it together with this reputation engine. So the fact that you use both engines at the same time is pretty new, so far I can tell. And the first product release in alpha release was around May. And the first official release that people started to use and we started to communicate around it was September. And we will release the 1.0 stable, like Go people release in a couple of weeks now.
All right, great. How many folks do you have using it so far?
A bit less than 1,000 for now, but we are growing at a crazy pace of around 5% new user per day. We are in 55 countries and 200 major cities. People from all around the world are partaking, which is super cool because it gives us more, if people from Thailand with a small connection or very big data centers in US or wherever are using it in different contexts, it gives us more granularity, more insight on what's happening on a global scale.
Okay. All right, great. So you talk about using it in different contexts. Is this technology that is appropriate for larger companies to use as well as smaller organizations and even individual users?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we thought it in the first place for small businesses, right? So people that are hosted, potentially not in their own premises, but in a cloud or using containers or whatever. So machines that are hosted and they could install it easily on their Linux basis. But since it's based in Go language, which is a language made by Google, it's extremely easy to carry it around to macOS, to Windows, and we will have ports for those machines. And it's extremely efficient in terms of resource consumption, So it's as close to C as you can get, more or less. So the performances are very good. So we thought about this product. It's like from SecOps for DevOps, right? So if you want to kind of industrialize it and terraform it and deploy it in an automated fashion, you won't face any problem. If you're just a single user at home willing to protect your privacy as well, it won't be a problem. It's just like, we're not in the Debian package yet. We're working on that, but it's super easy to just download the source code and compile it locally. It's like really straightforward.
That's pretty cool. So what ultimately, what do you guys hope to achieve with this technology with your company? I mean, are you guys really kind of looking to democratize security, or is it more along the lines of, just having an option for organizations to maybe add on to their existing security portfolio? Are you looking eventually to create maybe enterprise versions of this that you can actually sell and make a profit on? Because if it's open source and free, obviously there's not much revenue coming in.
We have to feed the people, right?
Right.
So our end game is more or less a galactic domination, obviously.
Yeah, okay.
But there are steps to this, right? So first of all, we'd like to be like a first line of security, like a default reflex that people have when they deploy a new server, a new machine, because it's pretty much what it's done for. So you package it, you deploy your machine, you don't think about it anymore. You go on the hub, you click on the scenarios you like, you protect it. Fine. Some people are trying to do crazy stuff or funny stuff with the product, like detecting if planes have problems, because planes are actually spitting a lot of logs. I didn't know about that, but it's pretty fun. They want to know if planes are going fine with like behavior. But whatever. The next thing is, more or less, we want to monetize things. So you have a premium access that will help people to have a fleet management feature. Like if you want to deploy it and administer like 2,000 endpoints, you don't want to do it manually one by one, right? So you want to make a security policy and you want to deploy it into like 500 points here, 1,000 points here, and so on. But what's important to us is, well, it's free now, the product and the IP reputation service will stay free forever for our users, because they are the people making the wheel fly, you know? So they feed us with their signals, they make us stronger. So what we'll monetize will never be monetized for them. It will be monetized to people that either don't partake in this global consensus or that want extra features like fleet management, self-monitoring, things like this.
That's great. I'm just enamored with the idea of having this, you know, that hive kind of consensus or just the crowd-based security. I wonder why organizations haven't really thought about this before, and if they have, why we haven't really heard too much about it. Is this, what is it about this technology now that makes it? I mean, did you guys just find like the secret sauce to make it work, or what's different now?
What's new? I think there are a lot of new things and new paradigms that make it possible now and not years before. First of all, the API approach. API is everywhere now, so you can connect anything with everything seamlessly. It's like for the next 5 years maximum. It's not something that we can really. We could really do before, because PHP and all the languages had to be compatible with this API approach in the first place. Also, I think people understood the value of the crowd. Like, it was very important that Airbnb, Waze, and other crowdsource platform could do this in the first place. They showed the way. They showed that we are stronger all together, and that it's impossible to match us as strengths as the crowd power. So now that it's in people's head, it's easier to walk this path. Also, they were pioneers. I mean, Fail to Ban pioneered and paved the way with their behavior approach, and it was super easy to use, extremely widely deployed for free. I mean, so all those were premises to what we do now. Now, what we have maybe made differently is we stitched those two concepts together, saying the behavior locally will be detected and it will generate a global network of reputation. And this is where we twist it a bit and we put it in a slightly different perspective. And also we can, deal with different layers. We can deal like on an IP level, on a user level, on a session level, on a business logic level. So it's really cool that the same system, the same crowd approach, to this reputation system, can be used and leveraged at any level. Because since the network is so vivid and so wide, you don't have to keep an outdated picture of what the reputation of an IP could be. I mean, every 72 hours, you have a clean slate, So if this IP didn't make any mistake ever since, it's fine. We are back to the basic. You're good. You can work and trade with us. If your IP is constantly doing crap, then we'll block you and refresh this block. Whereas the previous reputation IP system used to have up until like 3 months outdated IPs sometimes,
Wow. I'm just, I'm kind of blown away by it. Yeah. And I'm wondering if the, not to kind of put a COVID spin on everything, but, the fact that there are so many folks who are now working remotely, if that has had any impact on the just the way that the technology works, or if there is any impact at all on how organizations are kind of embracing this particular type of technology in the wake of a completely remote workforce these days. Have you had any sense of it one way or the other?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, before there was this castle strategy. Like you could put everything into a castle. There was a bastion in front. All your resources would be protected by one castle. It was super. But this pretty much exploded lately, because you have these resources that are in a Dropbox, you have these resources that are on your phone, on your watch, on your IoT. Everything is scattered across like cloud and everything. But on top of that, with the COVID, people started to connect their home with their work through VPN, right? So you could have in your family someone using an Android that might be compromised, someone else using the PlayStation that could have another problem, or a Windows machine compromised, and all of this would flow to your business, right? So this perimeter was already breaking in all the senses, and now it's totally exploded because, you know, home is a new office somehow.
Right.
So
right.
yes, people have to protect themselves on each and every level. And besides, corporations didn't really provide the framework to protect yourself at home, meaning it more or less relies on yourself to be protected somehow and to protect as well the company. So we think these free initiatives, this open source initiative can help, because it's, you know, you just have to use it. It's as simple as this. And you would be protected, and you would be helping your company as well to, you know, get a better level in security.
That's great. And I think as a lot of organizations kind of move into kind of phase 2 of their work from home regimes, you know, we're going to be seeing a lot of changes with corporate security and the way it's approached, and the way organizations actually support their employees as they work remotely.
Absolutely.
Well, Philippe, this is some really fascinating stuff, and I know I could talk for hours about it, but unfortunately we don't have that much time. So I do want to thank you for being on TechStrong TV with me today and talking with me about it. And I would love to have you back another time in the future as you know, as time goes on. Love to hear more about the technology and how you guys are doing.
This was my pleasure, Charlene, and anytime you want, I'll be available.
All right, great. Thanks. I appreciate that.
Bye, everyone.
Okay, everybody, please stick around. We've got live TechStrong TV coming your way, so stay tuned.
Disruption is occurring across every aspect of IT. Open source, cloud services, DevOps, and cloud-native software architectures are democratizing IT and radically transforming how business is done. The old ways of creating software and doing IT are being replaced with agile, flexible, faster, and cheaper methods, benefiting vendors and users alike. Accelerated Strategies Group is out to democratize access of industry expertise and knowledge. We use our expertise and experience to offer insightful, intelligent, useful information in a variety of formats relevant to the IT community: digital events, videos, reports, assessments, workshops, and implementation projects with tech vendors, IT organizations, and business leaders. We widely and openly share our work products, often for free. Analyst reports these days aren't worth more than a graph or chart that tells a story or illustrates a market trend. We work with developers, DevOps teams, cloud architects, security engineers, and transformation leaders most every day, creating and implementing transformational strategies and technologies. We're not just thinkers, we're also doers.
Hey everybody, welcome back to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the Thursday edition of the Webinars Preview. As always, we have so many great webinars on all of our sites, and I have a fresh batch for you that some really, really interesting webinars coming up. So hopefully you guys will be able to mark your calendars and join us for them. The first one is called Securing Data Sharing in OpenShift Environments. It's happening tomorrow, Friday, December 4th at 1 p.m. on Eastern on Devops.com. It's sponsored by Red Hat Marketplace, and it's one in an ongoing series of webinars that Red Hat is doing with its partners. This webinar takes a look at data security within containers in Kubernetes environments, and it talks about how Zetaset can help keep data protected and securely share data in OpenShift environments with real-time data protection solutions. Anybody who's been working in the container environment, container Kubernetes environment, knows that security is an ongoing issue, especially with the ephemeral nature of containers. So definitely this webinar is worth checking out if you have been having those container security issues.
Next up, we have a panel webinar that's happening Monday, December 7th at 1 p.m. Eastern on Container Journal. It's a panel discussion on container security. It's called The Battle for Container Security, and it features Matt Jarvis from Sneak, Jeffrey Martin from WhiteSource, Teddy Poles from Signal Sciences, and Pavan Shankar from Cicd. It's moderated by our very own Mike Fazard, and they're all very smart people, and they're going to talk about the current state of container security and what organizations can do to improve their security efforts for containers. This is definitely one not to miss. The third webinar today I want to let you know about is happening Tuesday, December 8th at 3 p.m. Eastern on devops.com. It's called Validate Your Disaster Recovery Strategy, Ensuring Your Plan Works. And it's sponsored by Gremlin. This webinar is all about disaster recovery, and we'll talk about things such as best practices for creating a disaster recovery plan and frameworks for assessing risks, how to test your disaster recovery plan by using chaos engineering to simulate black swan events, and how to measure the success of your disaster recovery plan, including a post-mortem guide and key metrics to track. This one is sounds like it's going to be a really interesting one, actually. Disaster recovery often isn't one of those things you think about when you think about chaos engineering, but I can definitely see where chaos engineering would be super helpful in recovering from a disaster or preparing to recover from a disaster. So that's all I have for this episode of the Webinars Preview this time around. Check back on Monday when I'll have a fresh batch for you. Until then, have a great weekend and stay safe. Hey guys, welcome back. Next up on TechStrong TV, Mitch Ashley does his Analyst Corner, as he regularly does. And he also has a conversation with Greg Sanker, who is an author, speaker, and former CIO. And they're going to be talking about the impact of Agile, DevOps, and CICD in traditional change control teams. So give this one a look.
This is Digital Anarchist.
I'm pleased to be joined by Stuart Foster, who's product manager with Perforce, and also Steve Howard, who is static code analysis evangelist, both with Perforce. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hey, Mitch, how are you doing?
Very good. How about if we let's start up with just a little bit of an overview of Perforce, and then Steve, why don't you do that, and also tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll toss it over to you to Stuart to give your introduction.
Great, yeah. Well, here at Perforce, really our role as we see it is to help developers write better code more efficiently and more quickly. So these days we tend to talk about DevOps and the whole idea of developer operations and how they put that code together, how it's constructed, how it's managed, how we control the processes around it as well. Of course, there's more and more regulation, it seems, these days in software development, and we're making that whole process from start to finish of writing code to delivering it, that whole cycle is hopefully being made easier, more comfortable for our developers that use the products. So that's really where Perforce sits. And we think of that as really enterprise DevOps and doing it at scale in large scale organizations. So my role really is specifically on the static analysis side, or static analysis security testing side, SAST tools, if you will. Trying to make sure that that piece of writing the code, actually developers writing the code itself, is done to the highest possible standard from both the security and the quality perspective, and also at the same time getting the maximum productivity from our development teams.
Yeah. Wonderful. Stuart, introduce yourself.
Absolutely. I'm Stuart Foster. I'm the product manager for Perforce's static analysis products, both Clockwork and Helix QAC. So I work with Steve. He's kind of my partner in crime, amongst a number of other sales engineers and developers and everything. And we're just out to produce a really solid static application security testing tool.
Excellent. Well, that's one of the great things about talking with you both is, since you have products in market, you talk to a lot of customers, especially in an evangelist role too, Steve. It really helps us kind of get an idea of where the state of security is in applications, what people are doing today. The whole idea of shift left, I think, has evolved a great deal. I think when I first heard it was move left in the workflow, and then it became, we'll move the, when the security people get involved. And we've really taken it much farther than that to really thinking about how we start writing secure code. Maybe one of you could kind of give us an idea of where you think we are as a community on getting to that point of when the code's written, it's written securely.
Yeah, so I mean, from my perspective, you kind of look historically, people using the term shift left, and from our perspective, that would have been doing some sort of code analysis on a server, and then moving that left in terms of the software development lifecycle into the developers' IDEs. What you see nowadays is that historically, a lot of those responsibilities would have been siloed. You'd have a security team, a QA team, various other teams that in many ways, because of they were siloed and in different stages of the process, you'd run into kind of bottlenecks. What you're seeing a lot more with the concept of DevOps, DevSecOps, a lot of development teams themselves are becoming owners completely of the code that they write. And what I mean by owners is that they are writing unit tests, they're writing more functional tests. They are ensuring that it's part of their responsibility that the code is secure. So that's the shift left. But then you have to think how developers work. They're working in IDEs. They have their own CI/CD pipelines. They may be using cloud services, various containers that are all getting spun up and broken down. So it's not just, to me, shift left anymore. It's analysis anywhere. It's basically having something that can work anywhere in a workflow, right? And in this sense, the security teams still exist, the quality assurance teams still exist, but what it really is a culture of security and collaboration that are coming together, right? Steve, I think you may have a little bit of a perspective on this too.
Yeah, I'm interested in your from the field perspective too.
Yeah, no, it's well, exactly that. I think it's a really good point that now we're not just talking about moving to the desktops, we are talking shifting left throughout the whole cycle. I think that is a key point. And it is really an opportunity using tools like ours and static analysis security testing is about being able to enforce the requirements and the needs from that expert security team where there were bottlenecks previously, trying to put that into rules and regulations that we can then push down to the development tasks and processes that are to the left of that kind of final sign off. So yeah, that in that form, very much I'd say it's shift left, and it's about that optimized process now where we can be doing that checking all of the time. So it's making sure we're continuously compliant to those security requirements or quality requirements, as the case may be. Yeah.
It's interesting if, we talk about the workflow when we think about the whole tool chain and pipeline, but if you really break it down into much more granular pieces, developers aren't working on a linear piece of development, right? They're in multiple places, jumping back and forth, solving bugs, adding features, developing a new capability, whatever it might be. So the ability to concentrate on any one aspect of an application sometimes is not even possible, right? So you need an environment where you're aided in how you write and create secure code, as well as think about writing secure code. You agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the point. We're trying to make sure that all of those pieces that they're working on at different times, and our colleagues in the version control system team know this very well. But obviously, there are tens or hundreds of branches running in parallel, as you're sort of saying, and developers are jumping between fixing problems on a current release maybe, and then carrying back on with their feature work for for the next release as well, and all the time to try and manage what security requirements each one of those had, or quality requirements as well, would be a real nightmare without sort of tooling and regulation around that whole process, which is a significant part of developer operations as a whole, the idea of automating a lot of that and building it into the system. So I think it's just enforcing that with making sure we're adding all of the extra pieces that we can also include in those processes.
And also, if you think about those developers too, they're experts in their fields, or experts on some of the functionality that they're developing, but they're not also necessarily experts as a security team might be, right? So part of the trick too is to offer kind of help, knowledge, learning via the tool set, so that the developers can keep the velocity up and develop to those standards more easily. And I think Steve mentioned a little bit of a buzzword that kind of we like to think about it. It's continuous compliance, right? It's having this throughout the process and enforcing it and continuously monitoring, remediating, fixing, and reporting that become important for these processes to run really cleanly.
It's interesting. There was kind of stepping back in time again. I think about the myth of developers don't care about writing secure code. Well, of course they do. They don't want to write insecure, vulnerable code. But I think there was a period where we thought training was, let's teach them about, how to avoid writing code with vulnerabilities in it. But when you talk about a continuous governance environment, you're just kind of talking about a whole layer of things, right? It's from the person doing the work to the environment that it's being checked in and integrated and being tested into the workflow. And then really the data, the information about that's happening on a continuous ongoing basis. And that's really your data set for producing the compliance information, right? We don't have to go ask you or check your code. It's already been done. It's done every step of the way all the time. And here's the evidence of it. And here's what we learned from it. And here's where we're doing well. And here's maybe where we can improve. I think that's how I think of continuous compliance. Yes, it shows up in a report down the road, but it's continuous because we have all that data.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point from the efficiency as well. I mean, the security team or the development management that want to know when this product or project will ship, obviously need to know where they are relative to that compliance requirement. And if we can keep it compliant from day one, we don't ever have that risk of building up, technical debt at the end of the process that we then have to solve. And I think that's a really important evolution that we've seen of the last few years, that that we have that knowledge to hand immediately at our fingertips, as you say. So that's a really important piece. And the other point you made there about the developer education, I think, again, yes, you can teach developers, and I know myself, in the past I've learned the right way to do things, wrong way to do things, but it is nothing quite as good as actually showing you the examples of when things are potentially risky within the code you're writing, because you really understand at that point what you're writing and how this could then be a problem. And it is the classic on the job experience that you really want for perfect education almost.
I'd love to hear your kind of definition or how you describe static code analysis, SAS, to people about if you're embracing that. What does that mean to a development team, to a software project team?
I think from my perspective, it's the idea of having an automated code reviewer, almost looking at the work you're doing in a fairly pleasant and passive way, not being critical in any way, shape, or form as well. So from a cultural point of view, I think the developers perhaps accept it more when it's from a machine rather than a colleague that perhaps is picking holes in their code they're writing, which is another good point about having a computer do that initial check. But yes, it's like having that guard at the end of the process. And we often joked historically about the value of the tools and saying, well, if you had two developers that were both going for the job that you're advertising for a new development role, and one of those developers is the cost of the license is more, but they never make a mistake in the code. They check in clean, compliant code with every commit. Whereas the other developer, they both have the same experience. They both write good code, but the other one could make mistakes and could check in, potentially security vulnerabilities. Which one would you pick as a manager? It's quite an interesting way of looking at it. But of course, you would always want to have that assurance that essentially it's clean code from day one.
Yeah, and also, in terms of the perspective, Steve talked a little bit about, the developer perspective or the hiring perspective. From the business perspective, you have to think about, the costs of reputation, lives, revenue, anything of a product being in the field and discovering an issue. The cost to fix a bug exponentially gets more expensive as you go further down the software lifecycle, right? So it's cheapest to fix it then and there, right at the start. And you know, in terms of kind of pain points that the software is trying to fix is, providing that knowledge, providing that quick remediation as developers are working, ensuring the velocity stays up, ensuring that, the continuous compliance enforcement throughout the process means that there's not a heavy lifting of work later in the process because you weren't reaching compliance requirements. The ease of using the software however a developer wants to work. It's all about velocity, in terms of, the business having that oversight and understanding, what are our risks and how soon are we going to be able to ship this product? Because, we know with many products, the faster to market you get, you have that first mover advantage, and that's what's needed in this fast-paced software market.
Well, it's very tough to recover from, reputation damage and quality issues or perceived quality issues around your products too. One of the ways that I explained it to folks outside of being a developer or within the security world is it's kind of like taking your spell check of a document and adding in the grammar checking. So this is the higher order, more complex, specific things around grammar. In this case, it's around security and helping you as you're developing or creating code, right? Make sure that you do it the best way. Avoid introducing security issues. I know that's a gross oversimplification, so don't worry. I'm not saying Perforce is like a grammar checker, but that is sort of a non-technical way of describing what we're doing. I mean, we want it to be that natural as part of the process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's very true. I think, we've seen the evolution of static analysis tools very much in the same way we've seen the evolution of things like the Microsoft Word, spell checker to grammar checker and so on. And it's kind of evolved to be more and more all of the time, and other systems similarly. But on top of that, there's also the opportunity then to, what we find quite interesting is to write your own checkers and rules that are specific to your application. So we can find in some cases where there have been security problems in a certain application for some special reason, not necessarily related to the constructs of the code as most of the coding standards check, but something that's specific to the project because of the way the project is designed or the code in that project interacts with outside external interfaces. And it has been interesting to work with customers. In some cases, I've worked with a very large telecoms customer on one occasion. They said, well, we have this translation module between sort of the application and the platform, and nothing should ever, go direct between the two unless they're going through this one piece in the middle. And it's the kind of the golden rule that we've taught all of the developers from day one. Nobody will ever break this rule. So, obviously it was slightly challenged by this and said, well, it'd be nice to check the rule. Let's put that enforcement in just to see if we can, use a custom rule to see if there are any cases. And of course, as you say, it should be clean. And obviously, a couple of hours later, once the analysis is run, it's a very big system. We found a couple of cases, only a couple, but there were a couple of cases where exactly what they said should never, ever, ever happen for the security of the entire system. It happened. And so we were able to then remediate those problems and keep that rule in for future development. Of course, it will always be enforced. So that was a really interesting case where there's also that, where you have something specific. It's not just generic grammar issues, if you will, or spelling issues, but something very specific to that document.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you could imagine some of these things coming out of, requirements or an internal coding standard or things that a development team might be following and be able to enforce these, especially when you start looking at legacy code, giant monoliths, that have been around for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, decades, and you don't have those original people who are developing, right? So, we sometimes think of our tool also as, the kind of like a quality assurance on a product or a code base that, it's legacy and all the new people have no idea how to use it, but you need to expand on it. You need to develop it because it's valuable IP. And how do you manage, developing new functionality and moving forward when, it could be as brittle as a glass house, right? So, that's the other benefit you get out of being able to enforce and write your own standards, I'll call them, and rules. Yeah.
Another classic case there, Mitch, is and you'll probably be well aware of this as well from the field, is this system was never intended to be connected to the internet. This was
guaranteed it will be then.
Yeah, it was an embedded system that was entirely supposed to run in an embedded environment with no connection to an outside world at all. And all of a sudden, it or something around it that's connecting to it is now connected to the outside world, and there's open attack interfaces. And now we have to make sure that they're not going to compromise the original legacy code base.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's just sort of the rule of unintended uses always occur, right? The thing we don't want to happen is usually what happens. So, yeah, the demo becomes the production system. It's another great example. I'm really interested in your perspective on where you think we are. If I made an analogy to the network security world, the best time to be a network equipment or network security salesperson is the day of or the day after a compromise, and automatically you've got budget and we need to solve this problem. I mean, I think we're well past that in most cases, but where are we in the software world? Do you see this as it's just a natural thing? Okay, what's our SaaS strategy? How are we going to be doing security within the application? What tools should we use for that? Or is it something where you have to mature to a certain point or have experience some issues before you're really going to take it seriously? Where are our development? And I'm asking for a generalization, I know, but what's your sense of where people are today?
I'd say, in general, it seems as though most people don't take these kinds of things seriously until it bites them. I think, there's some kind of safety feelings of some types of products that you can use, where you find out about a security vulnerability or intrusion, and you're using a piece of software that basically just tells you that the barn doors have been opened and all your horses are gone, right? But that's too late in the process. I think we all need to understand that, right? So the point of dealing with it sooner and using tools like security application security testing tools like Clockwork or QIC is that you're trying to build the risk reduction, the known unknowns that you can at least deal with sooner, right? So that you find out later, in worst case the doors were open, but nothing happened. You still have your horses because the stables didn't open at the same time or whatever, right? Just to make a kind of analogy to it there.
Yeah, I think obviously we do a lot of work in the embedded space, and in that area, having seen it over the last 10, 15 years, I think there was a time where we were educating people a lot more about what it was, what it was that we could do with static analysis to actually find some of these problems. Whereas I think, and there's a lot more awareness now of the risks in the security field and obviously what static analysis can do to help. So most people are starting to think about it if they've not already got it built in. So I'd say it is becoming more of an expected insurance policy against those kind of things within the tool environments. And obviously the other kind of driving force there is the regulation. So we're starting to see standards themselves creeping into the market. Like the new ISO 21434 standard for automotive, for example, where they're actually going to require some level of looking at the security of the system and making sure that we've done some of those things correctly. And probably that will include, we expect it to include some level of static analysis and coding standards and so on and so forth. So that stuff is really becoming almost regulated into the process, just like functional safety regulation has been in that process from the beginning.
Yeah, you could imagine.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, just on that topic there about like cybersecurity for automotive. You think about the cars are effectively rolling entertainment systems, right? So there's a lot of like new kind of vectors for attack, right? An insecure Bluetooth module inside a car and its infotainment system that is also connected to the bus controller that's driving all the data from every sensor around the car that's controlling your fly-by-wire driving and your fly-by-wire steering and all those things, right? It's it's very important, very important.
Usually you have, I believe, engine, cars and trucks that have starters can start by Bluetooth as one of the mechanisms. So, you have potentially the same attack vector. You need to be able to isolate that. Now you're into the, into the function of the engine versus the entertainment system. And there's a lot of work going into, I know, to the automotive systems. They're very complex. I mean, just as complex as many business applications, maybe even more so, because they're integrated from so many different suppliers. And they are, of course, largely built on embedded systems. It seems like embedded systems, though, are much more accepting of an update process, of keeping the software current and requiring some way of being able to update software in an embedded system, or maybe making it an automatic process so it's kind of touchless. Is that your experience as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think that is coming into many systems now. I mean, there are certain manufacturers driving that kind of process, with automotive, for example, as a prime case. And it is interesting because if you go back 10 years, that just was never even considered. Once you kind of flash that system, it was staying as it was until you climbed up the mobile phone mast or whatever it was that the embedded system was doing, and flashed it again with the latest version. So yeah, it is, the over-the-air updates is creeping in. And that will lead us to a more continuous delivery type architecture with the delivery of the software as well. That we'll be able to go to that. So there's going to be an interesting time. And as part of that, I guess now the focus has moved slightly from the cost of fixing an issue out in the wild to just, we don't want to have the issue because of the potential impacts on having that issue even for a day. The idea that a car might be possible to take control of from an external source, for example.
Yeah, and I think you're seeing a lot more emphasis on the security around a lot of these embedded systems, because a lot of them are so, requirements driven, compliance driven. They have ISO requirements that are needed to be validated by external bodies to make sure that these things are safe to use, because a lot of our infrastructure is built on the backs of these things that they're in some ways leading the charge of seriousness for these reasons, right?
Mm-hmm. And it seems also that industries like, we're talking about the automotive industry, are putting together their own standards that they're more accepting and flexible to them. But do you see more regulation coming at a kind of geographical country government level? Is that more of that happening? And you talk about ISO standards, of course, being more industry.
Yeah, I'd say so far.
Kind of like our privacy standards, we're talking about software security standards.
Well, yes, there is that as well. Perhaps, the European level, for example, or something we see on this side. But mostly it's industry standards, from what I can tell, that we're experiencing and seeing come downstream at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I think it depends on the level of sensitivity of the data. So you do see requirements as they relate to finance in like PCI, DSS, and things like that. You see security in terms of running a blank here, but they typically come from when the data is so sensitive. The U.S. government has their STIGs, DISA STIG rules, so it tends to come down from the level of sensitivity. I wouldn't be surprised if we do start seeing more requirements, perhaps for public data, but right now we have things like the HIPAA compliance and things like that. So as they relate to very, very sensitive data.
Yeah, defense industry is also a good one to start to drive standards too, and I know they're doing a lot in security. Mm-hmm. So just to shift focus here, we have a few minutes left. We were talking earlier about where people are in their maturity level of adopting SaaS and writing more secure software using those kinds of tools. If you were someone on leading a project, maybe an architect or lead developer or somewhere in the management chain that said, we're almost there. I just need to do a little bit more convincing, or I need something else to help my organization get there to see why we need to do this, and I'd like to do it before we have, a major incident. What's your best suggestion for kind of doing that? I don't know if it's internally selling or if it's demonstrating the value of it, or how do you see people successfully getting their organization to begin to support adopting it?
I think that's a tough question, and just because there's so many industries and so many different kind of topics of particular interest, it always helps to have experience of a well-publicized, kind of issue that's gone out into the.
We don't want to be like those people. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that always helps drive things a little bit. You've got something to tangible to say we don't want to end up there. I think again the regulation piece is where I see a lot of that being driven. The industry bodies are actually saying, as a whole, the industry doesn't want to end up there. That's not somewhere we can afford to be. And so let's try and make sure we get this right from day one. And that trickles down to the individual projects and so on.
Well, speaking of dogs, okay, hold on.
Okay, yeah, so that's okay, really where we're...
Just start your answer again.
Yeah, so that's really where we're seeing it predominantly from the, first of all, we don't want a case where there is an incident because, if we can use that as a tangible case and say, we don't want to be like those guys because that didn't end well for them. So that's obviously always a good driving force. But then it's regulation from the perspective of the industry bodies themselves getting together and saying, we really can't afford for this kind of thing to happen. And we want to make sure that, across the industry, we start to follow a best practice that's going to do our very best to prevent that, I guess, is a good way of describing it.
It seems this is also an area where security teams, CISOs, can be a real colleague asset for making the case to the rest of the organization. Because if you're a standalone software team, you have one set of justifications or definition for why you need that. Another is there are corporate, the CISO is trying to accomplish these goals, these things with the organization. And it's always easier to fit your objectives within a larger objective and get that supported, get funding, that kind of thing. So that's another suggestion I would throw out there too, that also helps folks. And plus it brings security and software teams closer together.
Yeah.
I think we do have security evangelists that are like, as you just said, who are championing it, right? And when we talk to those people and we go over static analysis with them, and this is the security focus, right? It comes down to being able to help understand their size of team, what kind of current development practices they have, and what that means in how you can roll out the tools and not slow down that velocity, because that's always the goal. Don't slow down the velocity, but add more value. So that's what we try to help them with, help them understand, and also help. Sometimes Steve is sitting with these people, and we almost help them mature in their software development process to move from a couple guys who are just doing nightlies and they have no version control, they're not using quality gates, they have no type of automated pipelines, to setting them up so that they can scale their development groups, they can speed up their testing, their development processes, and that all comes out of engaging with vendors like us.
Great. Well, gentlemen, this is a lot of fun. I really enjoy talking security and creating secure applications, and something that I think everybody wants to improve at to different levels of degrees, and hopefully before those bad things happen. It's always better to do it before, but if you have to do it after, you do. Maybe sometimes that's what it takes. So it's been a great talking with you again. It's this Stuart Foster, who's a product manager with Perforce. Thank you, Stuart. And Steve Howard, static code analysis evangelist with Perforce as well. Take care, gentlemen.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks much.
This is Digital Anarchist.
We have a pleasure of being joined today by Greg Sanker, who is former CIO, operations specialist. He's a speaker, author, bit of a futurist in leadership and digital transformation. He's also contributed to the Agile 4 Change and Enablement Guide and a reviewer of a lot of other content. So long introduction there. Welcome, Greg, to be talking.
Yeah, wow. Thank you. That's kind of awesome. Thanks for having me. I appreciate being on the show. I think
it's always good to have a fellow musician. Anybody with a Telecaster in their background could be in this anytime you want. So tell us, in addition to your wonderful guitar sitting behind you, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, you mentioned I specialize in IT operations. That's what I've done for more decades than I maybe like to admit. But service management has been a core part of that. And it's become really clear to me that my view of service management is a lot more streamlined and agile than a lot of people perceive it as. And so I've begun speaking at conferences and whatnot. I have a book of my own that's published. I'll let you guys go find it if you're interested about change management. But most recently, I was asked to work on the ITIL project on a number of ways, but most notably the change, what we now call enablement guide. And one of my prerequisites to get engaged with a project was, if you're going to ask me write it, I'm going to write it the way I see it, which is very different than what we've been doing in the past. And we're going to be pushing it forward. So that's a bit about me.
Well, that's wonderful. That's definitely a consistent theme with Agile 4 and other folks, Mark Smalley and others that we've talked with, is really recognizing, I think Agle's had its sort of process moniker, right?
Yeah, very much.
But there's a huge emphasis on, how do you fit Agile and all of the aspects of operations into something that is more of a dynamic DevOps-y Agile kind of world, if that's a way to describe it. Not to say that it didn't fit in before, but I think it's making it more prescriptive in that kind of setting, is what a lot of the good work that you and others have done.
I was an early embracer of DevOps, and part of the reason for it is the mindset that explores possibility, that ignores the boundaries in an organization to achieve outcomes. That's like music to my ears. I'm all in. So it is a match made in heaven. But like you mentioned, there's a lot of organizations that have adopted service management. They have used ITIL in ways that are very prescriptive, very heavy weighted, very bureaucratic, and slowed down. And it was never intended to be that way. It just is. It got adopted that way, right?
Well, and I think a lot of the work that's gone into Agile 4 will help make some of that shift. Certainly, it's positioned that way, and I know from other authors that was the mindset of how the contributions that were made. Now, you specialize around change management, and we were chatting when we first got introduced about how do you do change in management in a rapid development, agile DevOps kind of world. If you were going to be asked that at a conference by somebody, what guidance would you give them?
Wow. So I got an hour and a half platform, right? For that.
At least an hour and a half compressed into 20 minutes.
20 minutes, right? Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me put it this way. I think it really comes down to one fundamental paradigm that we need to change is traditional change management, which is what I call, your CAB-based, raise a request for change, blah, 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 is based on the idea that we inspect every single change. And as you probably know, Edwards Deming said many, many decades ago, we've got to cease reliance on mass inspection to get quality products. Well, that's exactly what we're doing when we say, hey, I need to make a change. Well, let's just take a look at it. So on Thursday, we're going to get together and look at that. But you know full well that in a DevOps environment or a continuous integration, we are moving all the time. We don't slow down and stop. And so that mindset, just the mindset of stop and let's inspect, is completely incompatible with a flow-based, whether it's Agile or DevOps or Cicd or any of the others that are out there that are more flow-based, rapid feedback loops, short cycles, et cetera. It's just incompatible. And so what we have to do is elevate out of the inspect mindset into the expectation mindset. And that is, what is it that this organization needs from change management? And some of it's governance and compliance, some of it's operational stability and recoverability, and some of those kind of things. But let's state what that is. Let's state what those things are for the organization so that those that are working in the pipelines, the value chain, or the value streams, can actually optimize how well we achieve those expectations, and don't dictate how they do it. Let's just dictate what the outcomes that are required by the organization. That's the fundamental shift, and it's big. I mean, it's more than a 180-degree shift. It's very significant.
Definitely a different mindset for sure. You know, the inspection versus not. It's not unfamiliar though. I mean, that's what security is doing about shifting left and moving certain. Learning the process. Data ops is also. Yeah, everyone wants to move early in the process, but it's more than that, because you're talking about a pretty different mind shift change. So talk about compliance, talk about governance from a change management standpoint in this new paradigm.
So you jump right to the jugular. That is the $1 million question.
Well, but it needs to be done, and we all sort of poo-poo it. But you know what? If you don't do it, it's really not fun doing it at the end, right?
So maybe you remember, because it certainly rattled my world. Dr. Forsgren said on stage at DevOps Enterprise Summit 2018, CAB is useless. And everybody in the audience laughed and cheered and da-da-da-da.
You're not talking about Cabernet. You mean
no? I think she probably would enjoy a good Cabernet. And
those others are still good, but anyway.
Merlot, et cetera. They're all good. But the thing is, she's not wrong. But she was looking at it from a very specific lens. And that lens was about failed changes, in other words, the success of changes, and the recoverability of changes. Two things that are really important to the stability of the business. And what she found in the data, she's a data expert. She has a PhD in this. So there's no mistake here. She's absolutely right. However, CABs frequently are part of the compliance equation. In other words, it's useless for those things, but it has a use elsewhere in the organization. And for many organizations, that's a very scary thought, because that's where we're able to document, demonstrate for internal and external auditors and validators, are we doing the things that we're required to do? PCI DSS, HIPAA, GDPR, all of those other compliance framework, NIST 853, which hopefully we'll get to in a minute, but they all have requirements around managing changes within your organization. So if we don't do it in the CAB, how do we do it? And that's precisely the point. So what I've sought to do is help organizations build those compliance points into the pipeline itself. In other words, we can point directly to where that's being done in the pipeline and don't require let's slow down and actually check the box here. The governance is, well, can I just say this? There's a difference between governance and compliance. They're two very different topics, right? So governance is about how organizations make decisions and making sure that those decisions that are made throughout the organization align with or help fulfill the purpose of that organization. Whereas compliance really has to do with the conformance. Are we conforming to applicable standards or expectations, either that the organization has or we have externally? So, but when we talk about governance and compliance, we think about performance and conformance. I'm sure you've heard that. COBIT and lots of other frameworks have talked about that for years. But performance is about your strategy and are you utilizing your resources in pursuit, or are you producing value or value creation? And I think that's fascinating. I'll bet you've read or heard of Mark Schwartz's new book, The Art of Business Value. It's a fascinating read.
Yep, I haven't read that one. I'll have to check it out.
I would put it on your reading list. And I know that sometimes he rubs people the wrong way. I found out that he rubs me exactly the right way because he asks some really challenging questions, like, what is business value? You'd think that's an easy question to answer, right? It's like, for a for-profit corporation, it's like, making your market windows, making your profitability, adding features that attract and retain customers, those kinds of things. But what if we're in, as I was as a CIO, what if you're in a government agency? It's not a for-profit organization. So what is business value? Delivery of services to citizens, upholding, environmental standards. There's a lot of things that governments do, but they're not profit motive. In fact, in some cases, they're not even financial. So what is business value? And so when we're running our backlog or we're scoring our user stories, Like, how do we score that in that kind of context? And then just when I thought that he had confused me enough, he asked, well, what if your business strategy, I don't want to give away his book, go buy his book, but
no, just tell me the last chapter. That's all I need.
Exactly. I actually sent him an email. He's a great guy, and he thinks very, very big. But one of the things that he said was, well, what if your strategy is we want to move customers off of this platform and onto one that's more profitable to us, or one that's in alignment with our roadmap and our strategy? So if we're down in the value streams or in the pipelines, scoring our user scores against customer satisfaction, customer value, things that customers really, really demand and want, we're actually creating negative value. These are my words, not his. We're creating negative value because we're making our customers like the platform that we want to get them off of. So business value would actually be, no, do things that make them less likely to like this product, make them want to migrate, make it easy for them to say, this is really getting old. I'm going to try your new service. And so
behavior change.
Yeah, exactly. And so, when we really start thinking about we're getting, your governance and especially your governance and your compliance, we have to have rapidly adaptive systems that allow us to, at any point in time, understand what the current strategy is and how it affects the decision making that we're doing at any point in time. All without, of course, getting your board of directors involved with every single decision throughout the organization.
Well, let me ask you this. I'm really interested. I'm really curious about how you take this kind of shift in mindset and how you've woven that into the change and enablement guide that you were the author of. So, it isn't a process discussion. You're talking about viewing things a different way, valuing some things maybe we didn't value before, maybe some other things less, and maybe delivering a different set of things. Let me just share briefly. I remember a day, probably not too long ago, where cabs saw their role as saving us from developers and all the bad decisions and lousy code they were going to create.
So absolutely.
That's what they say in those cab meetings.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
But, that's not what we're talking about. Tell me how. So how do you build that in a way that's going to help people make that shift through Idle 4?
So thank you for saying that, because there is some unspoken or lightly spoken or spoken only in factions kind of frustration there. It's like, let's be honest. I used to be a network engineer. I did network security. I did all things network. So I used to be a change manager at one point in time. And who the heck are you, Greg, to cast judgment on this piece of code and decide whether that's going to work appropriately? And everybody knows that I can't add value to that. And everybody knows that this external body who's not familiar with it, certainly not at the pace, you can't add value, and yet you act like you do. And that doesn't sit well with anybody. So we really need to if we shift our focus to what is it that we're trying to achieve. So I talk about putting the right measures on the pipeline. How well is this pipeline producing outcomes, those outcome expectations? Is it producing consistently high quality changes? Is it consistently not delivering failed changes? Or for the failed changes that do go through, how quickly and easily can we recover from that with minimizing impact to the customers? Those are the things that your cab or whatever your body is should care about, not the individual changes. You've got to get away from the individual changes. You can't add value to that. And so I get asked a lot of the times, it's like, well, what do we do with our cab? Since, they're very unpopular. And in some cases, the best answer is, now I'm going to say it publicly, so I'm going to be quoted on this, but blow it up, just get rid of it. And don't ever use the CAB word again, because it has such a bad name. But it isn't without value. So if you have a cab and the cab starts saying, look, developers, we can't add value to what you're doing, but what we really care about is some of these things. So let's talk about those things. And if you're talking to particularly DevOps, Agile, automated pipeline folks, they were going to welcome that conversation because they've already got it covered. They just do. I'm the change manager. Well, have you tested that code before you release it? Well, dude, that's the only way it gets in production if it passed test. There's no way for it to make it into production. So it not only is it insulting, but it's a dumb question. And undermines your credibility.
Well, let me ask you this then. I think where you're going, and tell me if this is right, is we have so much automation in this pipeline process, right? That's the whole idea of being able to produce software more reliably, more rapidly. There is so much data that's generated and captured, but not leveraged.
Yep.
We treat it as data exhaust, right? It's sort of that's a fancy term for it. In that is a lot of compliance, is a lot of governance information that you can then elevate and connect and basically save developers time by not having to produce reports at the end. I've already got 3/4 of what I need or what you need, and let me help you put the finishing touches on it so you'll sail through the next whatever NIST, whatever it is.
Yeah. So there, you get to write a chapter in my next book, because that's exactly
cool.
What we want to focus on. Is we want to be, all right, this is potentially controversial, but change management is a feedback loop. It helps us understand the quality of changes that are coming through our pipeline. Sitting there and passing judgment and saying nothing passes until I say so, that's not adding value. That's absolutely antithetical. You know this to the DevOps continuous flow kind of mindset.
So they'll go every way around you. You can they can find possible.
Yeah, and the other thing, as we well know, is like DevOps is most frequently used in the flagship products. This is the core business. Get out of our way. We have to deliver these changes to maintain our profitability, maintain our market windows, all of those things that are core to the business. And you think I'm going to stop for 3 days when I went from, a user story to value in under 24 hours in some cases? There is no way I'm going to stop. I'm just not going to. I will take the risk of it failing and you saying you shouldn't have done that.
You can talk to the chief product officer about
exactly. And I helped an organization who was, they had Agile coaches and they were doing all that. So it's a large company, but I'd rather not name them. And I was asked to come in and look at their change management. Well, what they had done was, rather than having one cab a week, we were having daily cabs, and we were having daily pre-cabs and then the cabs. And one of the things that I tried to get them to understand is these two are entirely incompatible. If you're going towards Agile DevOps as a development methodology, then you must move away from cab. Cab has got to go. And what was interesting is their flagship products, the ones that really made money for the organization, they could get away with murder. Why? Because it was so critical to massive revenue in the case of this organization. And so we have a big outage, we recover, we move on. That's okay. It's an acceptable risk. And change management was still, no, we can't have any, defects or whatever in production. And so we've got to get ourselves wrapped around the idea of managing business risk. You mentioned something about compliance, and I just this last week, like I said, I'm working on a new book, but I was looking at the NIST 853. Everybody's familiar with it, but they finally released version 5. And so I'm reading through, and the authors made a very fascinating statement. And I encourage everybody to go look at this. Version 5 is phenomenal, because what they said was, we have eliminated or reduced the specification of who actually does the activity. And we've instead focused on the outcomes that need to be achieved. In other words, some of the compliance requirements or the controls said IT will review or the change manager will review. And so if you're going to comply with NIST 853 previous versions, there's not a lot of wiggle room around that. What I've been saying for over 10 years and others have been saying is, like, if we focus on the outcomes, then who's doing it, how they're doing it is open for us to do it in the most effective way. And that gets us into the pipeline space. And it's a major step forward, because we struggle with that. Like you said, we have to meet our compliance. If you're dealing with sensitive information, pharmacy has HIPAA and credit cards and all that sort of stuff, you have to. It's just not optional. But you don't have to do it the way we've always done it. And that's the piece that I like to bring to organizations. It's like, how are you doing it? And can we demonstrate that we're doing it? Those are basic audit business controls minimums.
I'm curious about, we're sort of talking also about the whole issue of agility and speed. And on the other end of it, of the belief of the best way for something to be stable is don't change it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Which is antithetical to the environment we're in, for sure. And so it's kind of like you have to embrace, you just have to say, we love change. And how do we be super effective at it instead of how do we not change so we don't mess it up?
So there's two things that I'm going to mention briefly, but we won't have time to explore them. There's the field of study around complexity. You know, Cynefin is one of the most notable frameworks, and the idea that there's simple, complex, or complicated, complex, and chaotic. And we treat changes frequently like they're either simple or complex, meaning we need to get some eyeballs on this thing. But the fact of the matter is most systems, especially systems that we're DevOpsing, are more like a complex adaptive system. There's a level of complexity that we've not seen in days of old, like back in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, where these systems we could actually try to understand a modern system.
They're not linear. They're more, dynamic and,
exactly
self-creating, if you will, in runtime.
So that hit me a number of years back, is like this whole mindset is around the idea of it either is simple or it should be simple, and we can understand it and we can predict the outcomes. And you cannot do that. And so we need to build adaptive systems that say, hey, look, this is complex. And you're not going to send it to a board of examiners, a CAB, who are going to say, let's take a look at all the risks, because it would take you years to do that in a complex system. That's not going to happen. So we need to adopt practices that are more adaptive. And one of the things in that complex area within the Cynefin framework says that we need to run some experiments to better understand the mechanism. And how that applies to change management. See, this hit me between the eyes, because it was like, no failures in production, no failures will be allowed. That's antithetical to learning how the system works. If you don't make some changes to see how the thing works in operation, you're denying yourself learning, and you're probably deluding yourself that you're actually actively controlling it, right? The other piece of study that I've brought to the table is, and you've probably heard of it, this study of anti-fragile. There's a number of authors whose understanding is astronomically higher than my IQ, PhDs who actively debate such things. But I take complex things and make them simple. Here's the thing. Some things, like a tree, when the wind is blowing, the tree is waving. But there's more than that going on, is the actual fibers, the plant itself becomes more resilient to wind if it's been exposed to wind. Here in Oregon, often there's logging operations that have a lot of controls for the environment. Trust me on that. It's changed a lot since the good old days. But one of the things that we do here is we leave a segment of trees at the edge of a piece of property that's being logged. And we do that for the animals, for the environment. We protect the riparian areas. But one thing that you'll notice is within 1 year of leaving that stand of trees that used to be next to a large strand of trees, they break. A storm comes and they get hit. Why? Because they've relied on the strength of their neighbors up to this point, and they're not suited to stand the wind alone. And so those trees break. Here's the thing. If we don't inject some failure into the system for a system that is truly anti-fragile, we're actually making our systems more fragile. And so a mindset of change management that says no change, or no errors, no problems, no failures, ever, 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 is you are making your system more fragile, and you're treating a complex system like it's simple. And so we've got to change our mindset. Now, you know full well, and let me just blast into this, you know full well that as we take these mammoth changes that we used to make in the old days, it took 6, 8, 12 months to produce, and we've turned it into these microscopic things that can go through your pipeline in hours and produce values, is your blast radius. What bad thing could happen in production has materially changed. The risk is become very, very small.
Your ability to fix it, but
your ability to fix it.
It isn't 6 months to fix it or 3, it's 3 minutes.
So one of the change outcome expectations that I encourage people to establish is, what are your expectations for recovery from any given change? And can we realistically do that? So for instance, if I put something in my flagship product that doesn't work as desired, if I can recover within 2 minutes, no harm, no foul, is that okay? And in a lot of cases, it is. If it's a defibrillator keeping somebody alive, probably not. That's probably not okay. But in a financial transaction or a video streaming service or whatever modern digital services, it's probably okay, especially if you've engineered the release in such a way that you do it like that. Blue red switches on off. All of that kind of stuff that we're engineering in become. You start seeing why we're able to do that and what that actually does in production. It's wonderful. Sorry, you got me excited about that.
Yeah, boy, I could take you a lot of places with that.
Yeah.
So let's take it back to someone who's going to pick up the digital version or printed version of the Change and Enablement Guide author. Yeah. How is that approachable for folks? Let me be honest. I'm probably not going to go download that to get my heart pumping to go work out, get a better workout. Maybe I will. Maybe after listening to this, I will. But how do you make that engaging for people?
Yeah. Well, so one of the things. Well, I'll put it this way. It's like we're not selling a product. We're selling an opportunity to solve some problems. That's why we call it best practice, right? And there's a lot of best practices, and I don't feel like they're nearly at odds as maybe some of the industry might feel like. But change enablement is, and I've been saying for years that this day has coming, and it's now here. Is change management is in the crosshairs of modern digital organizations. It's a pesky remnant of days past. And what the Change Enablement Guide is, and there was more. I mean, for production reasons, I had to kind of limit it. But what I wanted to do was point in this direction of what I'm talking about. It's like, let's get people moving towards that. Because like you said, we're not going to change overnight. I'm not going to read the Change Enablement Guide and go back to work the next day and say, all right, I can save all the world's problems. And so what I've subsequently started doing is writing guidance around, but what do I do today? I went to a DevOps conference. I'm excited, but what do I do when I go back to work? How do I start moving in that direction? And blowing up the cab, while we might all celebrate that, that's not a good first step. Instead, what we need to do is start moving ourselves in a better direction. It's not more of same. It's what do we actually need to be doing here, and what's the best way to accomplish that? And it's difficult culturally because it becomes more of a culture. Like you said, there are cabs galore who despise developers probably as much as developers despise cab. It's a match made
cats
in
and dogs living together.
Exactly. Good reference. And so that group of people who are widely known for having that kind of mindset are not going to be welcome when they show up to your sprint and say, hey, we'd really like to be involved earlier in your change management so that we can help you. It's like, yeah, sorry, bud. Let's start somewhere else. So if change management starts with, we've got to get out of your way, we're going to start delegating more and more of your changes into your value stream. And instead, we're going to be focusing on, we're going to partner with you on, let's look at the results of what you're doing, because we believe that you are optimizing your delivery, and we believe that you have the right tools and controls in place. So we are moving more towards, are we achieving all the outcomes that the organization have? Is the organization even clear on what those outcomes really, really are? The one that always, I love this one. All changes must be tested before going into production. I was like, well, how many shops have you been in where that's not true? At least in modern times. I mean,
yeah, there is I call that the meh policy. We're going to test it. Meh.
Well,
no, of course we got to test.
Yeah, we call it blow testing, right? It's like, okay, well, I think we're all right. That is true. In modern terms, though, for flagship products, for things that are really, really core to the business, most organizations have some form of automated testing, or that's just part of the process. So rather than make everybody say, did you test it at a cab? Just like, hey, yeah, exactly. Is that happening in the value stream? If it is, don't worry about it. Let's move on. Is somebody with the appropriate authority approving that? And I'm going to take a minute to talk about this one, Mitch, is that everybody talks about change approval in terms of who's going to approve this idea going into production, this change going into production? Because if something goes bad, we want to know who to blame, right? In fact, we used to say, who has enough of, who is sufficiently authority that they'll get fired if something goes bad, which is of course the wrong question. Because the right question is, who has enough authority that if it goes bad, they don't get fired because they have the authority to put on that level of business risk, right? But if we move, and we could talk for hours, but if the idea of product ownership or taking a product view of services or modern systems isn't it true that the product owner is accountable to the organization to decide what things we're going to move into production? So to me, that's the change approval. We're approving that we want this change to happen. So nobody's adding value by making an approval at the end of the chain. We've already decided that. We already know that we're going to make this change. So those are two different approvals. One of them is about a product decision or a governance decision. The other is about a business risk decision of, is it actually going to achieve the results that we set out to do? I believe that most of the latter can be automated. If it's passed its tests, if the testing systems are appropriate, if we've done, in some cases I love peer reviews. It's like, the code needs to be reviewed by a peer, stamp it, and we ship it out. It happens in a minute or two, not hours or days, whatnot like that. So I think as we kind of retool our thinking around it, I think that's where we can start really solving actual problems that organizations have. I am reminded, though, I saw this. You've seen these before. These overhead views of an Indy car or a Formula One car coming in for a pit stop, and all this stuff happens, and off they go. I saw one this week that was 1.8 seconds. It was awesome, right? And people like us always share those on social media of like, that's an agile organization doing the things and blah blah blah. And so, like, you can't really argue with 1.8 seconds, 4 tires, top off the gas, and out you go.
Impressive.
But the question to me is, like, I'm a bit irreverent. Why isn't it 0? Why can't we make it 0? If faster is better, let's make it 0. And the answer is, we won't make it to the end of the race unless we have fuel. We won't make it because when you're racing at 200 miles an hour around corners, your tires literally don't last that long. It's not a matter of preference. It's a matter of life and death, right? So we have to change tires. So the question isn't, are we balancing speed and agility against risk mitigation? It's what it is that we're trying to accomplish here. And in the case of Formula One, we're trying to win the race. And to do that, we have to take on certain activities that cause delay. That's a requirement. So the question isn't, do we have to take a pit stop? We do. We need tires and we need fuel and sometimes minor adjustments. So the question then becomes, how quickly can we achieve those outcomes? And putting 4 tires on in under 2 seconds, that is phenomenal. Hats off to those folks that are doing that. And how do you get however many gallons of fuel we put in a Formula One car in 2 seconds? I don't know, but that's amazing, right? And I feel like that's the mindset that we need to adopt. We need to quit asking, why do we have to do change management? We have to do change management because part of it is to be compliant. That keeps us in business. That keeps us out of trouble.
It's a really good example because it's not an absolute. It's not, do we need to fuel, but what's just enough fuel for us to win, right?
Oh, and trust me that if you've watched it, I know, I can see it in your eye. You watch Formula One or Indy, and there's like 1,000 computers over there and stopwatches and gauges and dials, and they are calculating exactly how much fuel based on the game strategy or the race strategy, the conditions, who they're up against, what they think their strategy is. That's how much fuel we need to take on, right? So
it's a great model for us to think about of, it's not absolute quality or absolute whatever,
right?
It's what's appropriate for the organization. We're going to have to leave it at there.
Okay.
And I want you to come back sometime because the next topic is Stevie Ray Vaughan or Eric Clapton, but you can't answer it. You have to come back and answer that. So we have here another time. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. Greg Sanker, who is author of the Change and Enablement Guide of Agile 4. So I think you really gave us some compelling reasons to go check it out. So thanks a lot. It was great talking with you.
Thanks for having me, Mitch.
You bet.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Next up, we have two interviews from Mike Fazard. The first one is with Cindy Blake, who is a senior security evangelist at GitLab. They're talking about DevSecOps and GitLab's role in DevSecOps now that it has acquired PeachFuzz and Fuzzit, or Peach Tech and Fuzzit, I should say. And then he has an interview with Tomer Levy, who is the CEO of Logs.io, and they're going to be talking about what's driving the need for observability. The company just recently got $23 million in additional financing. So the observability space is hot, so let's give both of these interviews a listen.
This is Digital Anarchist.
All right, guys, thanks for the throw again. We're here with Cindy Blake, who is the Senior Security Evangelist for GitLab. Cindy, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
You guys just completed the acquisition of Peach Tech and Fuzzit, and it has something to do with a testing protocol or testing capability called Fuzz. And I think most people are like me, they're wondering what Fuzz is. It kind of sounds like a test I should take every Monday morning to clear my thinking. Why don't you explain what it is that this thing does and how they factor into a DevSecOps process?
Sure. So fuzz testing is a little bit different than your traditional application security testing. It can find different kinds of logic flaws that don't have a signature base like an expected security vulnerability would. And so we've integrated that into our end-to-end DevSecOps platform.
All right, cool. So how does that manifest itself? Is this going to be a gate or something that I put in my process, or what does that look like? And how hard is it to set up?
So out of the box, if you're using GitLab for CI, for continuous integration, out of the box, it's there, along with all of our other application security testing. So static, dynamic, dependency scanning, container scanning, secrets detection, license compliance, and fuzz testing are all available out of the box. And you can turn off some of those scanners if you don't want them all on. But the real key here is that it's automated. So every pipeline that runs will have all of your tests automatically applied and the results delivered directly to the developer.
Are you seeing any advances in DevSecOps? I feel like we talk a lot about DevSecOps today, but I'm not quite clear how many people are actually doing it.
Well, it's almost a generation one, generation two sort of scenario. So people understand that they want to shift left, that it's less expensive for the developer to find and fix vulnerabilities than it is to wait until a security team finds them downstream and then have to come back. But in order to do that, it's kind of challenging because the traditional application security tools have been developed for a security person to use and were intended to test an entire application, not a individual code change. And so people have really struggled with how to integrate those tools into the developer's workflow. And that's where GitLab really shines because we start from the developer's standpoint, not from the security person's standpoint. Mind you, we do take that into account as well. But we start with the premise of empowering the developer. And so we started with a CI tool and built the security capabilities into that rather than trying to bolt it on later.
Does this eliminate the need to buy all these third-party tools that are out there? Because I feel like people are buying the tools and then they struggle to integrate things. And then I wind up with this kind of somewhat disjointed process between what the developers are doing and then what happens at the runtime and the host. So are we smoothing all that out?
We are. So we've taken the approach that we'll provide you, fuzz testing and all of the other types of scanning right out of the box and give you a very robust solution. you can eliminate that entire tool chain, and a lot of our customers are. We've replaced incumbent vendors quite often lately. But if there's a particular scan that you just, particularly like, or you need something special, it's very easy to add those results into our platform as well. So you can get all of the scan results, including a third-party scanner, all together, both for the developer to see as they're iterating on the code, and for the security person, we have a dashboard where they can also see. So it gives the security person much earlier visibility into the risks of the applications.
Given that, what is the role of the security team going forward if a lot of the responsibility is shifting left?
Well, they still have a very important role. If they rely on automation to run the scans for the developer, and auto remediation can help eliminate some of the vulnerabilities even, then their role shifts from less about tracking vulnerabilities and trying to track down the developer that can fix them and doing things after the fact, to being more proactive and focusing more on what policies they should have. So what guardrails should be in place that automation would enforce in order to, what's their risk appetite? Do they want to fail a build for a certain level of vulnerability findings, or do they want to let it go through? And it's important to see what policies work and which ones don't over time, and make adjustments. And so they can be much more proactive and much less a kind of a spreadsheet jockey.
Do you think that this whole shift to microservices and containers is going to force people down the DevSecOps path? I feel like maybe somehow we thought we could get away with it with monolithic apps, but now it looks like there's a lot of dependencies, a lot more moving parts. So will we see more people moving down this road more aggressively?
Absolutely. They go hand in hand. I wrote a book a year or so ago where I looked at the next generation applications, is what I was calling them. So now it's kind of evolved more into cloud native, but the idea is you've got containers and orchestrators, you're using more dependencies, third-party code, so that you're assembling things and not reinventing the wheel. You've got more APIs that glue together all of those smaller pieces of code. And all of those things represent new threats and new attack surfaces. So you've got to think about not only scanning the application itself, but the whole infrastructure that goes around it, because all of those areas can represent opportunities for exploit.
Do you think there's resistance because the process is a little complicated? We're asking developers to scan code while they write it, then they're supposed to push it up into the runtime, and then they got to take care of the host as well. And then they got to keep an eye on all these things as they get updated over time, because what was perfectly good yesterday was now vulnerable tomorrow. Is there room for more automation here? It just seems like this is a lot of manual tasks for developers who might not have the time to actually write any new code if they're spending all their time babysitting old code.
Yeah, you can't really approach a cloud native application without automation. It's really, really important, because the other aspect is you're taking, with monolithic applications, you take big code changes and you work on them for a long time, and then you get to the end and you do a test and see where your vulnerabilities lie. But with DevOps, you're taking much smaller code changes all the way through to production. So it becomes very iterative, and you need a process that is as iterative and as automated, because now instead of scanning code once a day, once a week, whatever, now you're scanning code every time there's a code change and a code commit. So it could be hundreds of times a day, much smaller pieces. And so that's where people get into trouble, trying to take these older scanning tools that were developed 10 or 15 years ago for a method that was very different than today's, and trying to apply that. And so you really have to kind of automate the process as you go.
Mm. Do you think artificial intelligence will play a big role as we go forward in this whole DevSecOps equation, and what might that look like?
I do. I think it will play a really important role, and it'll make things easier over time to further reduce false positives, to be able to be more intelligent about, what a vulnerability means to you. I came from Fortify, and Fortify is very thorough about finding everything, and they want to err on the side of we'll find everything and kind of leave no stone unturned. But the problem with that is a lot of people perceive that to be false positives, because for them, they don't consider those things to be vulnerabilities. And that's a careful line to walk. And so I think where, intelligence comes in is helping to shape what is a vulnerability for you, given your risk appetite, and being able to hone in more on the things that are important to you specifically. So that customization, and that's where the AI is going to play a really big role.
Mm-hmm. So short of visiting your website to check out all the stuff that you have, what's your best advice to organizations as they think about DevSecOps and this brave new world of software development we're in?
So if you look carefully at your application security program today, if you are not doing robust testing, try GitLab, where all of the security is baked in. If you think about making choices between, is static analysis better than dynamic analysis? Or, I just don't have room for fuzz testing because I can't even get all of the basics done. Try this approach where it's already out of the box and embedded, and you don't have to do anything. We make it super easy, and we put it in the developer's context, not something that they have to translate from a security person's view. And so, when you talk about how will the relationships change, I think having that single source of truth and a single tool where both the developers and the security experts are looking at the same thing goes a long way to getting everybody on the same page and kind of rowing in the same direction, if you will, towards solving the problems instead of caught up in the tools themselves. So I would give it a try. And while it's embedded into our CI, you don't have to be using our CI. If you're using Jenkins or something else, you can use the two concurrently. And I think what you'll find is a lot less time and effort of when everything is brought together in a united view for the developer.
All right, I think you just said if you use the right platform, all the tools you need are right there next to your foot. Just look down, they're right there. All right. Hey, Cindy, thanks for being on the show.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It was fun.
All right, guys, back to you in the studio.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. I'm here with Tomer Levy, who's the CEO of Logs.io. Tomer, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right. You guys just landed an additional $23 million in funding. And after you sent everybody in the company a virtual beer or cappuccino or whatever their preference is, what's the plan? What are you guys going to do with that kind of investment?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm not sure about the virtual beer, but we're definitely going to send them a hug, at least in the beginning. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've been over the last year and a half, we raised about $75 million. So, at the company in our stage, the focus is really to grow the business, right? We have heavy investment in products. And over the next year, 2-3 years and going forward, it's really how do we take, these amazing products and we bring them to the market. So, hiring, more programs, and just being able to meet customers where they are. So that's the plan.
You guys just had your annual end user conference, and you added support for Jaeger and distributed tracing, if I'm not mistaken. How do you see distributed tracing and logs and metrics and all these things coming together? Because it used to be people were just, worried about finding stuff in a log. So how is the nature of what we are now calling observability changing?
Yeah, for sure. People are still trying to find things in logs. I'll tell you that. But as companies move to the cloud, like the whole digital transformation, it's not just running in the cloud, but now they run in the cloud in a very distributed way, right? They have, different Kubernetes and different services and microservices and serverless. So everything is broken into so many small pieces. Logs by themselves are not enough, right? To understand what's not working, why is it not working, what's the root cause of it. Yeah, logs are a very important portion of it. As over the last few years, we realized that our customers are asking for more. And as kind of a customer-obsessed company, we realized that we have to give them one tool where they can look at their cloud environment and detect the issues, isolate the issue, and find the root cause. Right? Detection is usually done with alerts, with tools like our infrastructure monitoring now or logging. Isolation, where exactly within these 50 microservices is the problem, is really where Jaeger is powerful, right? This is why we launched distributed tracing 2 weeks ago. And this was an awesome event that we had, like super successful, great speakers. And we announced like a product we've been working on for a couple of years, which is distributed tracing connected to the logs, connected to metrics, with really our vision is to bring one platform. And this is what our customers need right now and expect from us.
Your platform is based on an ELK stack, which I think, if I remember, is Elasticsearch and Logstash and Kibana, maybe? Or I forget exactly. Okay.
You got it.
A lot of people start out with that on their own and kind of build that out. And now you guys are making a case for saying, hey, use us to manage that for you. Are you seeing more people willing to do that because they want to spend more time maybe writing code?
Yeah, for sure. If you think about how companies build applications today, they use open source, right? They'll use MongoDB and they'll use Kafka and they'll use all these open source libraries. And then they'll put ELK because it's free, it's open source, I can just use it. They'll use Prometheus for monitoring, they'll use Jaeger, they use these kind of tools. And more companies realize, hey, it's actually pretty hard to scale it. It's actually, it's not my core competency. I'm not going to have a better business because my ELK runs better or my Jaeger runs better. It's something I just have to do. And they started by themselves. And then we offer them an easy migration, an easy way to just get it as a managed service and get all these additional capabilities. So we started with logging. And now when we were adding the metrics and the tracing, it all comes together and suddenly, it's not just that it's hard to do by yourself. It's almost impossible to connect the technologies together, logs, metrics, and traces. And I think where customers are realizing there's a lot of value there.
Some folks say, or at least they're concerned, that ELK runs out of gas at the top end when their applications get more complicated. Is that true, or is there ways around that, or what is the ultimate scalability of the ELK stack?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. It will fail at some point, and for it not to fail, you'll have to put a team of developers and DevOps, smart people, and a group of smart people can do anything they want, right? They can do everything. Unless you put a lot of resources, especially, Black Friday is coming, right? All the e-commerce companies are going to spike with usage and more transaction, and every business that supports them, you'll have to make sure that your ELK stack supports that. This is where managed services like Logzeo, like a SaaS service, is like you don't have to think about the end, because for us, there is no end. You send as much data as you want, because we're not taking the ELK stack the way it is and running it. We've obviously developed over the last 6 years a lot of technology, for data modeling, for data scalability, for availability. So self-managed ELK is really hard to scale. That's true.
Mm-hmm. Where does security factor into your thinking around this whole stack and monitoring? Because it seems like there's an effort to shift security to the left, but what exactly does a DevOps team need from an observability platform to achieve that?
Yeah. So 2.5 years ago, we launched a security product. It's called the Logs.io Cloud SIEM. And we basically try to address that. And if you think about it, 5 years ago, even 2 years ago, you need to open the firewall. You would call a security person and they would open the firewall and make sure you have connectivity. Today, the firewall actually sits within the Kubernetes networking. So who is going to change Kubernetes or AWS security groups? The DevOps team will have to do it. So security teams are still calling the shots in terms of the policies, the controls, but the people who actually carry the load are the DevOps team. So when we launched the platform, we wanted to bring a platform that is end-to-end observability and security view. And today it's being used by the DevOps team, often called the DevSecOps when they expand responsibilities. And then traditional like analysts and security engineers also use Logs.io for security. And this is a really growing part of our business today.
Do you think this shift towards smaller components and microservices is making IT more complex than it used to be by maybe a wide margin? And as such, does that force people to rethink first A, their DevOps approach, and then B, the monitoring platforms they're using?
Absolutely. Right. If you think about it, the whole DevOps motion started just to some extent because, you wanted to break the barriers between IT and dev. You wanted to make sure it's easier and simpler. But then kind of this monster was created, and that monster, quote unquote, adds a lot of complexity, but it provides tremendous value. And the value is your ability to deploy fast, to deliver products faster to the customers. And that comes with a toll, with a price, right? If you want to deploy 20 times a day, everything has to be broken into very, very clear pieces. Once you break it into pieces, you're able to deploy faster production. Now, what happens? People thought that they can take their traditional tools and approaches and say, okay, I'm going to look at logs, I'm going to look at CPU and memory and disk space, and I'm going to know if my system is working and if I have issues. And I think many organizations are realizing that now you have to have a different type of monitoring. You have to look at transactions, like with tracing that we release. You have to look at the overall metrics. You have to look at specific logs. But more important than anything, you have to connect all of the dots together. So you'll see an issue, someone just swiped the credit card, something breaks. How do you know which microservice on which pod, on which Kubernetes caused it? If you have this level of correlation, you can click one button and it takes you through this entire journey. So we're not the only one with this platform, right? There are other companies that offer this way of thinking, like Datadog. We've taken the open source approach. They have their own approach, and obviously they're doing very well. But this is what customers need today, and this is what they're asking for.
Do you think that these observability platforms will replace a lot of the existing tooling that people have, or do they get layered in alongside? And if it's replaced, can I justify the cost by essentially eliminating the licensing fees for a boatload of monitoring tools that may become obsolete?
I think the answer is twofold, right? For the younger companies, the cloud native companies, they're born in the cloud. It's more of an evolution, right? They use something basic, they use the ELK, they move to a managed, or they move to something else. It's kind of they evolve their tools. I think for the enterprise, this is a revolution, right? They use legacy data center monitoring tools that are not designed to monitor Kubernetes and microservices. And now they really have to adopt a different monitoring, but this is not a one-day transition, right? They'll have, 20% of their apps in the cloud and 80% on premises. What do they do? So this is where they have to start slowly, gradually deploying next generation tools, and then slowly kind of deprecating their own monitoring. And there is a cost challenge for them, but it is an enabler to go into the cloud. It is an enabler to be competitive. So I think they're adopting this full force.
Do you think this shift towards observability is going to drive a wave of mergers and acquisitions across the sector, because people are saying, hey, I need tools that have more context. I need more integration. I want to roll all this stuff up. So how do you think the long-term impact of this is going to play out?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the world will shape up the way customers want it to shape up, right? Users want have a platform, not a best-in-class tool, best of breed. They want a platform. More and more customers want it. And I think the vendors will match what customers want, at least the vendors that want to succeed. Therefore, I think there will be consolidation in the market. If you're a vendor in one of these classes of monitoring and you don't have the platform, you either have to be really, really good, or you'll be consolidated by a larger player in the market. We just saw a couple of days ago IBM acquiring Instana, which is a good example of a vendor that is trying to, again, I don't know exactly the use case, but I can assume they want to remodernize their monitoring strategy from kind of the more legacy capability they have to a newer capability. But I think in the long run, all of these vendors that want to play in observability will have to have the full platform and not a single point solution.
All right. Well, short of coming to visit your website, what's your best advice to organizations as they kind of wrap their minds around observability, how to get there? People are all starting from different points. So, what have you seen in terms of success at this effort?
Right. It's a really good question. I think people sometimes are too focused on the tools and the how and less on the why, what they're trying to achieve, right? They put all of these tools and work really hard, and then some of them do not ask themselves, wait, what am I trying to achieve? Why are we doing all these efforts? Like, what's the driver? I think once you start with, hey, what's important to me? Is it to deploy software faster, improve productivity of developers, make sure my end customers are happy? Once you have a strategy, you can go back to say, okay, maybe I don't have to start with the whole full-blown platform. I can start with one that is going to take me, halfway there, and then I'm going to add another capability. So one advice is I would look at the motives and make sure I achieve my goals. And the second kind of advice would be, at least for organizations which are not very mature, they're just adopting cloud and going into this area, is start with one, either a metrics, APM, logging, get sophisticated and then add more and not try to do it all in once.
Great. Hey, Tomer, thanks for being on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right, guys, back to you in the studio.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond, CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and TechStrong.tv.
All right, that's a wrap for this edition of TechStrong TV. Hope everybody enjoyed themselves. Please come on back Monday for a new episode of TechStrong TV. Got lots going on. So until then, have a great weekend, everybody, and please stay safe.